Every moment, every idea, every breakthrough starts with a human being. Research isn't about data, it's about people. But in reality, researchers spend 80% of their time wrangling data and only 20% uncovering real insights. In a world flooded with information, how do you find what matters? You start with Research HX, the AI-enhanced solution built for researchers. Researchers who know that behind every number is a real person, a story, a spark. Imagine harnessing data as it rolls in to make smarter decisions faster, from fieldwork to final reporting. Sample management handled, data analysis automated, insight sharing just one click away. No more siloed teams and disconnected tools. Research HX brings it all together in one seamless platform. Because when you listen deeply, you see clearly, you act boldly. Research HX, efficiency, intelligence, insight, all in one.
Cappuccino? Oh, all right. Good news, bad news. The good news is that the coffee cart has a bunch of really good croissants. The bad news is you can't have just one. I'm telling you. All right. Cool. Well, thank you, everyone, for grabbing your seats. I know there's some people still trickling in, but we're going to kick things off. A couple things. Who here knows how to do socials? Social media, tell stories. Does anybody tell stories on social media? Anybody? Somebody uses Zoe. Awesome, that's one. So here, cool thing is I'm kind of busy. I got my hands full. But we do have an Instagram account. If you want to be the person that is sharing all these wonderful stories through our Instagram account, we have a phone somewhere that we want to give to you for the afternoon. So you can tag yourself and tell some cool stories. If that's you, please go see one of the volunteers over here. Yeah, let me grab that. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're about to kick off Growth UXR. As with all of our programs, we want to give a very big round of applause for all of our wonderful sponsors, without whose help we would be unable to get together today. Thank you very much. Look back. User Interviews, Maze, Rally, Alita, Ipsos, Listen Labs, Susie Forsta, and Build UX. You are all the MVPs. Normally you can only have one MVP, but today we have 10. Cool. So today this afternoon, we are talking about the intersection of research and growth in users, growth in revenue, growth in only good things. And when I thought about wonderful people who would be the right individuals to host this afternoon program, The very first person that popped into my mind is none other than our host and curator for today. She's over there in the corner. Her name is Zoe Glass. Zoe, why don't you come on up here and take it away? Please give a warm round of applause for Zoe.
I think we can all agree that that's the world's cutest co-host. So, thank you all so much for being here today. We have an amazing list of speakers lined up, and not the least of which because I got to curate it. But why, before we get started, why growth? Why are we in this world at all? Why do we care about this potentially new thing? For one, it's super in demand, right? The job market right now, not the best necessarily. It can leave us feeling really stagnant in what we can do and what we can take on. And we're seeing more and more in postings for specific roles, but also just expectations and roles that driving growth research is coming up. But in terms of things that maybe are more positive, that don't feel like we're being boxed in, it's an extremely proactive practice. Research historically was quite reactive. If we looked 20, 25 years ago, it was usability. We took products that already existed and said, what could make it better? On the inherent assumption that if we made things good, people would use them over other things. But that's not the market we live in anymore. We live in a world where there is TikTok, YouTube, Vimeo, just to say the top of the line for a single medium, sharing video. So UX can't be purely our differentiator. It has to offer something unique, powerful, and that we haven't quite thought of yet. And now this is a really big shift. It's from research as data, research as discrete sections, to a way to grow the business and drive the business. This morning, we heard a lot about practices like this, where we don't want to be defined purely as researcher. And I think for some of us, that probably hit us at our heart, no, as a researcher, that's enough. But it's more that we're not thinking about the practice holistically and where we can head. And growth really gives us a vehicle to do that. Now, a big piece of that is the better we get at this, the better we get at keeping our jobs. Again, I'm not going to skirt around the fact that layoffs aren't happening, that these things aren't scary. But growth gives us a really clear way to grok that solution. One of the things that Alec loves to say is that when you're good at growth, you're a little bit like the salesman who's consistently beating their sales target. You're not going to get fired. So here's our opportunity to consistently beat our sales target. And more than anything, it gives you an opportunity as a researcher to define your own value. How often have you gotten to the point of this quarter, the semester, whatever you want to call it, that you're like, ah, shit, you don't think what I did was valuable. You don't think what I did was powerful enough, and I know it was. Growth gives us a huge opportunity to not only drive the future, but shape it, define it, value it, and measure it. And we're going to talk about that a lot today. Now, this is big. This is new in a lot of ways. So how do we go from this maybe wonderful idealistic thing that I get to talk about at this high level to practices that we put on the ground? That's what our lineup is going to dive into. First up, we have Konstantin, who's going to talk a lot about how he drives monetization strategies. He's been at some of the top companies all across the world and has taken on some pretty crazy projects that he'll talk about today. Then we'll have Jenny, that's going to talk about market share and how research teams can both own that share, but own impact with each other. Again, feeling more empowered. We have Jessica, who's going to talk about 0 to 1 in terms of driving actual revenue. People don't like to pay for things, so how do you make that positive? We'll have Gus, who, spoiler alert, it's his birthday today. I don't think he's here yet, so awkwardly sing him happy birthday, please. And he's going to be saying, well, not only how do we measure 6 months, but how do we think about 6 years? How do we think about what's next and what's next and what's next? And last but not least, we'll have David, one of my wonderful colleagues at Google, who's going to help us put numbers to all of this. How do we use user behavioral data to actually make a point and say we're doing these things? And again, own that. We're going to take that back from PMs and engineering who get to selectively pick their metrics and tell us how we performed and say what we're doing. That's going to come up a lot this week, by the way, so also a great primer there. As researchers, we shape projects, we shape programs, we shape companies, and today, we're going to shape our own future. So, thank you for joining me. Let's grow together. And I'm very excited to hand the mic to Konstantin. Take it away, sir.
Thanks so much. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being here. Kicking off our growth session today with an approach to discovering new monetization opportunities and value areas for your organizations. Hey, I'm Constantine. I've built a decade-plus career in helping teams find novel ways to drive growth and revenue, from startups to large tech companies, including YouTube and major other social media companies that I can't mention. I will say today that I cannot speak on behalf of my current employer, so you're getting a little bit of a collection of everything I've done throughout my career. My remits have actually included everything from vague executive requests, ambiguous spaces, risky product bets, all the way down to vision and exploratory spaces where sometimes we didn't even have a product or teams built yet. And in all of these, my work has identified and driven new ways to bring value to the business. The goal today is to give you a chance to break out and transform a little bit of how you might think of your approach to UX research and what it can do for your companies. It's about becoming a catalyst for innovation and thinking about how to drive growth within your organizations. I'll highlight some of the key areas on my successful process and how that might help you evolve from an insight gatherer to a business instigator. So I'm excited to share this process today. It's helped me a lot in my work. I'm inviting you to view it as an inspiration for new thinking. It's not a strict guide. We all approach our work uniquely, and I want to make room for that. Hopefully it's an effective addition to your toolkit. I want to say, as researchers, we strive to ultimately eliminate unknowns, but bringing comprehensive knowledge and bring confidence to our teams leads to this kind of passive pursuit of perfection. And it creates this exhaustive insight gathering process where we try to educate, but we're trying to build something that's almost encyclopedic. And today I'm actually encouraging you to take a step back, create unknowns. Let yourself move away from building a library and actually supercharge your work and unlock your team's potential by stepping into possibility versus perfection. So a little insight into how I approach a lot of what I do. The way I come to my work is really bringing my teams along in these journeys to push us beyond incremental product boundaries into very new spaces. It's about going from how might we's to what ifs. It's not about building on the familiar, but actually sculpting from the unknown. Now, we know the opportunity of UX researchers is that we're at this intersection of business and user problems. And the goal today is, again, to shift beyond that intersection into innovative monetization directions. So the opportunity as a discipline, as I see it, and yours as a practitioner, is to really go beyond typical UXR feedback or reporting or what's requested of us and get outside those boundaries to really not just build better products, but build smarter businesses. Think about ways that your business can sustain, innovate, and grow, and understand the full ecosystem in which they operate. So let's talk about that. This is my very brief attempt at going for branding here. I tried to build a little AEIOU framework, and I call it my strategic success stack. So in my work, this stack has been my proven approach to successfully navigating these ambiguous projects and open spaces. Caveating again, this is my personal approach. It may not work for everybody. Hopefully, it just provides some good insight for you and starting points for how you might work. And again, I'll go through it as an overall process and then cover a couple specific pieces here that might be really helpful. The first one is to ascend. This is not just zooming out. This is actually really being purposeful about coming up and above everything that's around you, getting a really broad view of what's going on. Look at your industry. Give yourself permission to really just get out of there, out of your current boundaries, and find yourself in the uncomfortable unknown. Second one, exploration, pretty self-evident. You can connect and learn about other functions in your organization. You might actually look at other areas of the business. You may also look at other organizations, the broader industry. Internal networking, external networking, it's all just as important. You need allies, you need co-conspirators, you need people to challenge you, willing to actually push back on you. Igniting. This one's the really important one for me. And in many cases, I find that UXR is asked to just share insights or provide a soundbite on a user or a behavior. But other teams become the gatekeepers to that information. And so sharing is the outcome. But by igniting, what we want to be doing is actually, you're driving your ideas You're holding the key to progress now. And if you're trying to start a fire, you don't just throw matches on the wood and walk away. You actually wait and keep trying and keep pushing until you actually see the flame come up. So it's not just about sharing your thoughts or sharing your insights. It's about nurturing the fire of the idea to life as you have found it. And now that it's out there, it's time to optimize. Great ideas get better under pressure. So you want to develop this iterative mindset. Maybe you've already got that. Maybe you're doing that with some of your team members. But there's also this question about being able to challenge and be challenged, to really reform and improve on the ideas that you're finding. Document objections. Think about how you can grow from those. Look for truth and critiques. Look for other ways to operate. And continue to use research as we're familiar with it here. You can start actually thinking about what research directions can I take from what I have built to this point. I've optimized this idea, I've gotten feedback from stakeholders. Now I can start actually looking at interesting ways to research these questions. Most importantly here also is there might be stopping points where you get no's from stakeholders around you, but these are opportunities to say that they might just need a different timing or a reframing, or that there's something else out there that you can join it up to make it even more interesting. One more click, sorry. And then finally, unleashing your idea. Ideas without action are just entertainment. And so what you want to do at this point, you've built up your idea into this interesting package. You've got multiple partners that you've talked to along the way. You've leveraged your internal and external networks. You now want to make these sticky through storytelling. You want to get them out there. You want to get them into the business in a way that is actually grabbing hold and actually sticks. You take it to product. You maybe create prototypes. These are, again, the areas we might be more familiar with in our day-to-day. And as we build up from here, this is where you can start then transforming into real impact of revenue, other product areas, and so forth. So with that, the overall approach covered, I want to actually just look specifically on these two elements here of exploring and igniting. Let's dig in a little more. So exploration and experimentation, these are really interesting ones for me. I find that in my process and in my career, all of the powerful innovations that I've been a part of driving have happened at these intersections. It's usually not in the middle of what's going on in product. It's actually very far at the edge. Your insights and observations, again, as a UX researcher, really empower you to be the connector here. You become really much more exponentially valuable to your orgs when you're combining these with other things you can pick up on in the business. And so this is where you can start digging into who else to talk to. We all have a core. We talk to PM and design and engineering sometimes, maybe even business and sales. And if not, really start digging into those other teams. You want to get a landscape. You want to really understand across the org. There's an innovation puzzle there, and every team has a different piece. So engineering knows what's technically possible. We know that. But maybe we could also hear from them about what users want or what they see or hear in their networks. Sales gets prospects. They hear about things that people want. They're trying to really get your product out there and maybe can talk to you about where it's fitting, where it's not fitting. Customer success and finance. Again, finance specifically, they understand the business model constraints. I'll talk about that in a moment with an example of how this has worked in one of my projects, hypothetical project. And marketing and partnerships, they know about potential collaborations that are out there. You might have competitors or even other third-party service providers that could be an interesting pairing for something you're doing, and maybe an integrative portion of a product that you're going to propose, or maybe even a build or buy kind of debate that you could start talking about for a capability that you don't have yet in your org. What you're looking for are small gems of wisdom here. You really just want to start putting a shape to how things work around you, or how they should. Digging in a little more and thinking about this from a business lens, please don't throw tomatoes up here because I'm trying to advocate for a little bit of an MBA mindset. I know a lot of us probably have dizzying conversations with PMs where we get really frustrated because there's some kind of metric we're driving for. But what's important to think about here is actually that understanding the business first will help you really see where and how you can plug in or even adapt what you're trying to drive towards what business is looking for. So thinking about costs, constraints, financial dynamics of the business, you can then start identifying strategic opportunities and really plugging in for those. Those are starting points for learning and understanding, and your mindset starts to grow as you do this. You start to see these things, and you're assembling these pieces. As you're talking about the market, as you're seeing things coming in from users, These indications of potential opportunities are the things that can really help you turn what's assumed to be a necessary cost into an increased scalability driver. So some sample things to consider here just as a starting point are from a perspective of a video media or software as a service company. Have you ever thought about your infrastructure costs? Streaming services require these extensive infrastructure bets to deliver content to users, which include things like hosting, where you've got to store the content, server costs, where you're running the servers that are powering the actual streaming platform. Your network bandwidth costs you something. Your actual cloud storage for the videos or the drafts of videos, which I'll be talking about. Customer support, another org there for your operations. They have to actually go out, there are costs. They have to help people out, see if there's problems that they can solve. You're staffing that. Same thing for your professional services. If you happen to work with advertisers, you have someone who's actually working with them to build up their practice on your platform. And these are all costs that you can start thinking about in your research when you're thinking, how can I plug these things in or really drive the conversation? So next step there, and the transition here into igniting, this is where the strategy meets tactics. And so don't try to sell completely new initiatives as you're coming up with these ideas. The final goal here is to kind of spread and move ideas around, get people moving in the direction. You don't need a final product yet. You're just trying to get things moving and people talking. So what can be helpful here is mapping current initiatives, seeing what people are already working on, and then identifying where your explorations or your findings are starting to intersect with that in interesting ways. Thinking about a multiplier effect, and this is something that I think gets tossed around a lot, but really talking about where small additions can create outsized value, where things that are currently being overlooked could actually be amplified as helpful bets. The key here, again, is like looking for headwinds that could be helpful. And then as you get more comfortable with this, maybe you can just start doing your own kind of pushing here. But your network will be your low-risk entry point here for idea testing and building. Think about casual conversations that you can have with people you already know, whether they're in your company or out. Using your research readouts could be really interesting. Invite people who aren't even in your specific team. Bring them in just to see what's going on and then engage them afterwards and talk about what did you see that could be interesting or what was surprising and so on. You're all probably really good at this already, so just think about including folks that you maybe haven't included yet. Internal channels, like sharing your findings to like a finance channel is something that could be like eyebrow raiser, but also could be really interesting to start getting feedback from folks you don't normally engage with. And then the classic brown bags, but again, inviting folks that maybe are not usually who you would talk to. Maybe even reaching out to an exec and having them sit in on it, and then, again, getting some confirmation or pushback from them, or maybe starting a new idea with them and pushing you towards who to talk to. So what could this look like? Hypothetical, again. I'll walk through an example of what this could be like at a content hosting or streaming platform. So we kind of get the ascend portion here, I think. You're moving from this user focus to this business focus. You're not ignoring users, you're just getting a fuller context. What do I need to know? And what's going on in and around the business. Then we start doing some learning. So let's say as part of my Ascend and Explore portion, I'm reading our company 10K, and I find out there's some interesting call-outs or warnings in there. Where are we making revenue? What's our cost structure? Where are we investing for the future? What are the risk factors being called out? I spot something, and it's about storage and server costs. And I want to dive a little deeper. And so I reach out to a financial analyst who maybe I've already been talking to, or maybe it's a first time, and want to see what is going on here and have them explain to me a little more. So I bring up this curiosity about our storage, and they start talking to me about what goes on there. We've got a tiered pricing model for storage. Bandwidth is actually really expensive. Compute is expensive for transcoding and compression of the video. What our break-even is. They might even get that deep. Sometimes they can't share those numbers, but we might try. The critical discovery here is that while live videos generate ad revenue because people are watching them or running ads against them, unreleased drafts are actually just taking up storage space. They represent pure cost. What can I do about that as a researcher? There's no monetization there. There's no team there. It's just the storage. So what could we do with this cost that's compounding over time? So how do we build assumptions around that? Let's do a napkin sketch, light model, develop a little like total addressable market, simple stuff. And you can not be nervous about this if you've never done it before. Google search, ChatGPT, or not name dropping, any AI model can probably help you just put together some ideas of how to do this. But you'll do a usage analysis here. So number of active users who save drafts. How much storage consumption is it per draft? How many of these users are returning to their drafts and updating them? What's the cost calculation there? So we're going to look at cost times drafts times users and how much storage cost is per month for whoever you're putting your storage with. And so 2 million users could save us, could save an average of 5 drafts a month, 200 megabytes of average size per draft, and then at a 2 cents per gigabyte per month storage cost. You come up with a number. It's a starting point. Don't be intimidated again. And again, this isn't meant to be like perfection here. This is just something to get you started with the conversation. The goal is to get yourself a rough, quantified understanding that you can have something to go talk to people about the business problem and its scale. So you don't need to know all the words to the song. Just be able to hum a few bars, and you'll be good. Now you're going to the next stage. How do we ignite this? All right, so I've got a general idea of what's going on. We want to get into these actual discussions with our cross-functional folks. Workshops, maybe, like think about ideas, capabilities, and what ifs. And then maybe take it from there. What if we ask people to pay for this? Let's be outlandish and say, we're going to tell our users they'd have to pay for everything they upload. Crazy, right? But let's highlight something else, maybe go in the opposite direction. What if we eat the cost and tell them that? Does that make us a value-add platform that they're going to come to? Are they going to like abandon all other platforms and come here? So start bringing those kinds of crazy questions to people, work with them, and make these instigations for what you could do, what you couldn't do. Finance could tell you what users might pay. They might give you a pricing model to work with. Marketing might say, hey, that's interesting. We have a positioning strategy that might work around that. We've just been working on this other thing. Eng could even say, you know, that's kind of crazy, but we've actually got this other thing that we're doing with something similar. And so just thinking about what algos could run on those, Eng could give you some ideas of what you're doing with this empty storage or unused drafts in storage. They might be able to run something interesting to help your systems. And so we come up with these interesting options here where maybe what's coming out of this is a premium archive service. Maybe we're doing tiered storage with like similar limits or different limits that you're paying for at different stages. Maybe organization tools. Could be draft management. Could be stuff like creative enhancements. Maybe you've uploaded a draft, and now like let's talk about what else you can do with that. Maybe we're prompting you with those algos that the engineers came up with, and saying you should finish this. It shows high signal for like really good user interactions. Thinking about a direct storage marketplace, even. Maybe you want to like just not have people go off your platform. Maybe this is really about getting them on your platform with everything they're doing, and so you give them a pay per gigabyte approach, or maybe there's team storage or bulk storage options. And so the outcome here is really that you're coming up with this comprehensive menu of potential solutions and like addressing this cost challenge, but then also thinking about what else you can do that creates a new value prop. And now it's time to run with more familiar processes that we might know about. Make it more real, get team depth, stakeholder discussions and debates, 0 to 1 in emerging space research and approaches, shake the box a little, figure out what's inside. And start with these internal stakeholder validations and maybe take it out to users. Get out, do hypothesis testing. I think Gus will be talking about this a little bit more in a bit. Is there a there? So market research, competitive landscape, all this stuff that we know, this is the stage where now you're optimizing and you're trying to think about what can I do with these ideas, where do I take them, how do I test them, and how can I bring back really good validation or hypothesis testing to show teams that this could be a thing. And then integrate this. What do you know about the potential opportunity from previous steps? What do you know about internal appetite that you've been hearing from your network? And what do you have that you found from starting research that you can now talk about in terms of, is it a new product direction? Is it implying extended service offerings or value adds to what we've already got? Does it create new research work streams? And is that all? That's still okay. At the end of it, what you're doing here is actually building this up to start like building your muscle around it and start being able to see, even if this one isn't the one that does it, maybe the next one will. It just helps you start seeing how things plug in. And so you can work with partners to craft what this pitch might be. Share this, kind of like in a startup way. Pretend it's your business. It's not just your team. The whole company needs you to succeed in some way. And so share this market insight about the research revealing, this estimate about a market opportunity. We're really well positioned because we've got the storage. We paid for it already. We just need to activate it in some way. And then what can we do in terms of revenue? Well, here's the pricing models that I worked on with finance. We can figure out something that might look appropriate. And now take that and drive it organizationally. I don't want to go too deep here because I'm sure everyone in this room is very well versed at how to make this work, how to get those point of view documents out there, how to really make sure that people are listening. But I think this is also the point where, again, you've ignited, you've put something together, and this is now, you're creating a library of things, but you're also creating living ideas. And creating these compelling narratives that can connect back to the business fundamentals and product opportunity are the ways to really help other people in your organizations and companies like latch on. If you're not ready for this, work with a PM buddy, work with a finance buddy. Be bold, talk to an exec, like I said, or a level plus, or a director. See what you can get people to thought partner on. And from here, it flies. You've nurtured, you've given it its due, you've put in your energy. There's handoffs to functional areas. You can still be driving this, but this is where you have a success point to say, we looked at it, it was really interesting. The business might not be ready for it right now, or maybe they are, but this now sets you up to just keep repeating this process, developing this sustainable practice. So the key takeaway today is really simple. It can seem really messy. Every piece of knowledge here and perspective that you're gathering across these very different places versus just users is a potential revenue opportunity when you're viewing it through this lens of user value and business value creation. I gave an example today of server space and storage, but this could be a lot of different things in your companies. It may not be something that's a cost center. It may be something you're seeing in the industry that someone else is doing, and you can just say, why don't we do this? This could be an interesting pairing for something that we're already doing. I saw somebody using 2 phones the other day, and they were running both of these apps with ours. Why might they do that? How can we lean into this? Open your mind to it, and think about the fact that through this lens of user value and business value validation, the key here is to really develop your framework, to just be able to see this stuff out there and kind of connect the dots. And your unique position as a user researcher makes you perfectly suited for this. Don't feel like it's too crazy or too out of hand. I put this image here on purpose because it reminds me of how messy some of these internal organizations and external information coming at us can feel. And when looking at what may feel like absolute chaos here, I think it's a reminder for me that it takes a moment to step back and remember that all the pieces here are made to fit together. You just get to find out how to do it or how you want to do it. You already have the skills to identify these solutions and opportunities. And I think you're not just a UX researcher. The thing to remember here is you're an innovation catalyst waiting to happen, and you can drive this in your own teams as well. My name's Konstantin. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. You've got questions? This is you, I think.
Okay.
I don't know what this is. Don't we look prepared? I have no idea what this is. Is this the remote?
It is.
Thank you so much for that. I think the piece that really resonated with me is talking to directors, which has been so revolutionary in my own career thanks to some advice you gave me years ago. And it blows me away how much they want to talk to you. So if you're sitting here that's the piece I can't adopt, they just don't know who to talk to about the user. And when you give them that entry point, the number of messages I've gotten that are hey, I have this strategy rolling out tomorrow. Can you review it and add a bunch of stuff? And I've been able to say yes, or actually you shouldn't do this, and they've changed course. So do it. Start talking to people.
So true. Yeah.
And sometimes they're really lovely people like Heather here, who's clearly so approachable, right? Okay, awesome. So you and I have had the pleasure of working together for quite some time. We started our careers as junior researchers at YouTube. I'm curious, you've given us some great advice today. How might that change or vary when you think about things you might adopt at the beginning of your career versus now? What advice might you have for kind of people just starting out that's different?
I think that's a great question. And coming into this, I would say being bold and knowing what you're coming in with as a researcher and what you're able to do gives you a starting point and a springboard to go from. You know what your core capabilities are and what you can do with them. And I think what's important to think about is as you're starting a career, you still want to build up that professional network. You still want to start building up these capabilities where you've learned all of these methods, let's say, and your approaches and how to test human psychology. What you can now do is start learning about the frameworks and systems that can help you test business success, or test, again, MBA frameworks, and think about what makes your business run or what could make another business run. These are often the approaches that people end up 1 or 2 years into their career meeting, a really fiery engineer and seeing something interesting that the business doesn't want to pursue, and then just going out there and starting their own thing. And so it's not necessarily about this being the be-all, end-all of do this in your job to succeed. It could also just be about finding ways to get this muscle, build it up, start to make those connections, and see how you can actually bring these business insights back. It can be small ways. You may not be doing, sometimes early on you have to make sure you're getting the work done. And that's very fair and very real. But you also get to imagine, because you're fresh to the industry and you're fresh to whatever your company is, and you can start really poking holes and asking questions. Later on, I think we start to harden a little bit around what it is that we need to do. Some of the people I speak to out in the industry, just at offline events, we're not necessarily talking about work, but it comes back to it's always going to be ads.
Yeah.
We're always going to have to run ads. We're always going to have to figure out some kind of monetization thing. But that's the exciting piece here, is that monetization just represents you bringing value enough to somebody that they're willing to part with their hard-earned money to give it to your company to help them. It's not a dirty word. It's actually something that's really exciting to me because you've built something of value. And so thinking about, as we get into those later stages, what can we do to keep ourselves excited about finding these opportunities, getting outside of the core of the business, even if we've gotten the same thing all the time? How can we keep that excitement in our teams, keep that excitement around the career field as well?
I love that. I think friction is one of those things that can start a fire and it can polish a beautiful stone. You kind of get to choose for yourself which way that goes.
Love that.
We have a couple minutes for questions from the audience. Anyone that I can point to, Alec will bring you a microphone. I will call on people at random just for fun otherwise.
Got one here?
So, very big fan of Zoe, following her for almost my entire UX career. Very inspirational, and so glad you're hosting the event, and great to meet you, Konstantin. So I really resonated with your talk. I've been a solo UX researcher from the start to my career till now, and I just stayed in that role, worked with a lot of teams. And so I guess one of my main questions is, when we are working with startups or, these early bootstrapping cost businesses, let's say they're oh yeah, we'll give you a research project. That goes really well. Then you bring them another one and they're oh, we're so sorry. We can't see the value even though you brought us 10x value. We just don't want to part with our hard-earned money because it's just not 20% more, 30% more. Their expectations are through the roof. So how can you come back at that question and say, I can bring you that value. It just will take more time and patience. It's not just snap 2 weeks, 10x growth. I know it's a difficult
That's a deep
question.
one, and I think we both have startup experience that we can talk about that one on. I think there's no one answer here, and the experience will always be different, and also to make a nod to the fact that the funding environment may change, and it is different now than it was a year or 5 ago. When it comes to actually bringing back that value, however, I think there's a question on being able to really navigate what those waypoints are for them and the expectations are for them and what's realistic. You may be in a brand new industry and maybe there's just not been a paradigm shift yet that people are taking up this product. Is it something where you can work with marketing and say, can we double our marketing efforts and keep looking at who the right users are, who the right cohorts are to get this product out to? It could be something completely different, what I was talking about, where the business is investing in these core capabilities, and you're thinking of novel ways to leverage those to scale the business more quickly without having to invest in new areas. Zoe, I'd love to welcome your input here as well, if you've got.
I love this question, and I think I have a talk on Thursday. Please come. That's going to address some of this. But I think one of the things inherent is we have this assumption of friction, right? You're telling me I can't do something and I am against. And that we're stuck that way a lot as researchers, especially as we're exploring really big new areas. So a big question of that is how do we step out? And for me, number one is relationships, right? How do I invest in this? You talked a lot about it with directors and the like, but with everyone you work with, how do I understand your North Star? How do I understand what you're thinking about? How do I understand, by the way, what New York Times article your kid just wrote so I can send you a little congratulatory email, thank you Google Alerts. But tapping into people to know that you care about them, you care about their outcomes, I care about you as a person, not just as these pieces, is gonna buy you a lot more capital to push on things and to push back, because it's not gonna feel like pushing back, it's gonna feel like a partnership. So I guess that's my piece on that.
Yeah, no, I love that. And navigating together towards a common goal. I think that's always the thing. Without understanding exactly the situation you might have been asking about, being able to maybe recraft it or reposition it in a way that, how do we all drive together? Yes, we want to hit 20x instead of 10x, but
totally.
How do we get there together? Yeah.
And even that, like, are we aligned on the same thing, or have we designed success in the same way? Many times in my career, I've thought about that, where I'm like, oh God, I really thought we agreed we were heading to Sacramento, and they're like, no, I'm going to Paris, Texas. And I'm like, I had no idea Paris, Texas existed, right? So have that conversation. And if you're really feeling lost and stuck, one of my favorite things is just to put my research hat on, take a step back. Hey, what did you mean by that? Like, and you do this with your friendship too. Like, Constantine and I are lucky enough to be friends outside of work. And he might say something to me where I go, hey, that made me feel a little bit weird. Could you just like tell me more about that? And chances are, by the way, it was something completely different. So it helps in life as well. But just take that step back. We have 30 seconds for the world's fastest question, if there's anyone out there. Shout it out. I'll repeat it.
Mike is on the way.
Hi, so I have a question just about this as it relates to like other disciplines, because you talked about partnering with marketing, and I love this topic that you're showcasing, but it does seem like it's like the purview of marketing, right? Because like they often do their market research, but then also talk about like revenue and generation. So like, how do you, as UX researchers, how do you see we position ourselves, right, when we have this other research arm who's like also doing this in a way, and making sure there's like no contradictory information, and you know they don't feel like we're encroaching on their space. So just want to know how you think about this.
World's fastest answer.
I love that question. Reverse democratization, I guess. I mean, like we talk about, you know, everybody being able to do a little bit of research and giving them, empowering them with methods and being able to go out and make inquiries as PMs or as designers. Totally support it. But also, we can't look at ourselves as, oh, this is my domain and that's their domain. I mean, it's for all of us, really. I think going forward, we will empower how we work and empower how our successes happen by stretching into each other's spaces. It's how orgs are going to have to really function to just stay nimble. So I would say caution against like that's their domain, and actually start to partner and say, hey, you got all this stuff on the market. I have a lot of depth on these few things or this area where you haven't stretched into. So can I share that? Can that help your report in some way? Can we cross-share findings and so on? Cross-share audiences, and like, can I sit in the room with you and so on? So I think look for ways to build bridges rather than to think about where there's a fence.
People want to work together more than you think. Constantine will be here for the rest of the afternoon because I'm making him. So thank you so much. One more round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Where's my next speaker hiding? Thank you. I was like, where did you go? Thank you so much. And now we have Jenny.
Hi. Do I get the...
You get the clicker. That's why I was handed that. Constantine, I understand now.
Okay. Hi. Welcome, learners. Let's see what we're up next. That was Q&A. Here we go. Researching to win. All right. Well, here we go. Okay. So I'm Jenny, and I'm excited to share with all of you today. Before I do, I want to just emphasize that everything, and I mean everything that I'm going to share, are my ideas alone, and I am not here today representing my organization. But I will be bringing specific examples from my organization because I want to show you specifically what I'm talking about. So, why are we here? Well, we're going to talk about how to develop a point of view on what a winning product looks like that leadership can't ignore. And I want to hold your emphasis around those phrase, a winning product. That is what we're all about. So we're here to talk about growth and a winning product. And to do that, I want to just have you look at these words and put them to the side. I don't use these words in my day-to-day. The people who join my team know that, and my collaborators know that, and so I want you to all know that too. So what are we going to do? In this talk, I'm going to introduce you to an approach that we need, I believe, to shift towards as entrepreneurs hell-bent on building a winning product. And we'll touch upon some of the key ingredients that we need to do this. We're going to take a look at some specific case studies. So we'll look at 2 examples from the B2B world that I live in day to day, and then wrap up with some Q&A. Okay, who's ready to get started? Okay, good. Let's take a hypothetical starting point. So imagine you parachute into a new project, team, or company. And you might start your research with the knowns. You might dig into assumptions. You might go to stakeholders and figure out, kind of what do they know, what's their view of the world. And then you might maybe do some things like look at the current product. You might spin up a demo account. Let's see, you might look at product data, prototypes, mocks with designers, and you might review internal or external existing research. But what's the problem with this approach? So, in my view, where you're starting is already getting you towards insights that validate, right? You're already in alignment with your stakeholders, and so you're on a path towards symmetry, if that makes sense. So by symmetry, I mean that we end up confirming existing ideas, and we're engendering empathy for our existing users, and we're impacting existing metrics and roadmaps. Now, what if we changed gears? So what if we think about insights that are doing something different, that are going to rupture the status quo, and that are going to contrast what our stakeholders already think about the world? Now, I'm not suggesting that we go in and sort of blow up everything that our stakeholders, kind of know and believe. But I'm coming to say that research, this is the job, I think, of what research should be doing every single day and on every single project. So, researching to win is entrepreneurial in nature. We insist on insights that are going to reveal something different, that are going to bring winning products into focus. Again, our emphasis is on building winning products. And to do this, we're going to have to get a little bit maybe uncomfortable with sort of where I think UXR is often sort of positioned and even believes what itself is, what our purpose is. So we're going to be doing things like identifying possibilities, whether new markets or segments that point towards novel opportunities for growth. So what does winning mean? Let's take a moment here to reflect. So I'm going to let a well-known executive from my organization, whose title begins with a C and whose title ends with an O, you can fill in the blank, answer that question for yourself. I don't know, my communications VP never got back to me, so I'm not sure what I can say or not. But this is the answer that I heard, so I put it out there to all of you. So winning means that your research has a direct and outsized influence on decision-making at your organization, and that your ideas are evident in the products that you ship to your customers. So let's talk about some key ingredients. In a typical project, you might ask yourself, do we get beyond the knowns? By knowns, I mean current users, current customers, industries and use cases. I'm coming from a B2B world where we build software for business use cases, so we're not necessarily thinking about one user. We might be thinking about organizations. We might be thinking about industries that today we win with. So this is what I mean by sort of getting into the knowns. And the other thing to ask yourself is, do we truly understand our competitors? And I'll pause by saying by competitor, I don't mean just one other competitor. I mean legacy competitors. I mean sometimes spreadsheets and calendars, things that our product competes with on some level, as well as emergent competitors. So who's kind of breaking out and doing something novel, and what are they doing? So are we doing these things? Okay, so I think that research really needs to have this consistent go and see practice in everything that we do. And so what we're going to talk about today, these winning ingredients, are something I call the periphery and the competitor. So here's how it works. So first, before we get into the other two main ingredients here, I want to say that for me, a prerequisite is knowing the product. And I don't just mean at a superficial level. I mean knowing it better than anybody else on the team, all the way to the back end of how it works. And so that's really your first point. That's understanding what your product is and what its potential superpower is. So that's the prerequisite before anything else. Okay, and so then you want to think about the periphery of the product. And this means identifying use cases that you aren't yet supporting. So a lot of times our focus is on, again, like our user right now. Who are we selling to right now? The periphery for me means getting beyond that, and we'll talk about why that's so important in just a moment. And really dissecting your competitors. So what decisions have they made, right? What's working for their customers? And also what isn't working, right? This is a way to accelerate our learning when we seriously consider this, right? Versus kind of building in a void. So these are our key ingredients, and we're gonna now see them in action. Let's take an example. Okay, so in the first example, so Rippling, how many people have heard of Rippling? I should have asked. Okay, like I said, I'm not here to represent my company, but I am going to talk about some specific case studies from the research team at Rippling. So we offered a product for clocking in and clocking out of shifts. So employees can clock in and clock out and get paid accordingly, and so you can have, take care of payments, but also take care of compliance, which is hugely important when you think about things like paying overtime correctly in California and other places. But at the time, we didn't offer a product to actually help organizations schedule and manage employees' shifts. So we could handle the clocking in and clocking out, but not sort of creating what you might think of as really complex calendars. Right, and this was a blocker to closing deals with larger enterprise perspectives who, really thought like, hey, well, this looks like an interesting product, but you can't handle this. And so, we weren't even in consideration in kind of the early part of the sales funnel. And so, we knew already from the outside of this project that checking the box, just like shipping a basic scheduling product, wasn't going to be enough. So as researchers, we really pushed the team to explore the periphery in order to bring focus to the product roadmap. So there's no one-size-fits-all to scheduling, right? So there's a lot of existing practices. If you think about, different industries, different tools that are out there, you've mom and pop kind of places, brick and mortar, doing things in, a calendar sometimes, and you've got, industries that think about, healthcare, right? Lots of locations. Think about retail. Again, lots of locations. You might have employees who are getting scheduled across locations, different types of shift structures. It can get complex really quickly. So we pushed the team from the outset to say like, hey, we need to go out to the periphery to bring into focus what it is our product is going to support. So the first thing we did was really dig into industry context and understand the difference and similarities, again, between retail, well, these were some of the industries, there were many more, but retail, manufacturing, healthcare, and support, to name a few. And then we needed to dive into admin workflows. So what were admins doing in our product? What were they doing outside of our product? That's, again, what I mean by the periphery. So not just look at what they're doing in our software, but like, what are they doing in adjacent tools? What are they even doing, on paper at their desk? And finally, we mapped the data journey. So for those who don't know, Rippling is a compound startup. That means we offer many, many applications. And we wanted to watch the flow of data, not within one application, but between. So from the moment that an employee might clock in, how does that data flow across into, like all the way into payroll and then downstream into accounting applications, and look carefully at how employees, operations, managers were interacting with that data. So again, that's what I mean by periphery. Are we sensing like getting out of smaller kind of focus areas to kind of bring into focus what we want to be doing? Okay, so moving forward here, we arrived at a lot of insights, of course, but I'll share a few just highlights. I'll throw them up here so you can kind of get a sense of what this starts to look like. So first, we were able to clearly define use cases. I've blurred out a lot here, but you can probably make out some contrast, right, between healthcare and manufacturing, between what informed the unit of the shift. Is it a location-based? Is it, based on some other criteria? Is it flexible? Is it is it a rigid kind of schedule? So the next thing we did was we dug deeply into those admin workflows, like what are people doing? And what's the data model for what goes into a shift? So again, this is getting very, very detailed. And finally, we mapped the data across applications in great detail. Again, like what is happening, where are the problems in that flow of data, and what are the opportunities? And so we could put this all together, and we could really start to see gaps in the roadmap and specific opportunities, whether for industries, approaches to scheduling, or connecting the dots better across the data in Rippling, okay? So this informs a winning product. I realize I might have put a lot of specifics up there, and if you've never dealt with HR software, this might not make a lot of sense, but I hope what I'm getting at does make sense, which is that these are the places you need to go and see to really get into the trenches, I think, with the product team and ship a winning product. So the outcome, research was deeply involved with the product from beginning to, well, it hasn't ended because we continue to ship, but shaping that scheduling product on every level, from the go-to-market, thinking about a basic product for simple use cases to a premium tier, what set of features might go into that, everything from how we are going to prioritize the first set of features that we ship, knowing that that would prioritize maybe certain industries that at the moment are more relevant to the company and our growth, and helping make those trade-offs, again, as we think about that total addressable market. Okay, that was case study 1. Who's ready for case study 2? All right, let's go. Okay, so we're going to take another example, global payments. The world has changed, right, with COVID, post-COVID, and we started to see that many of our customers were starting to hire in many different markets outside the United States. So looking to pay people in different geographies, and that's hard, right, because there's a lot of regulation, there's a lot of complexity in moving money across borders. And so the company had planned to address this need by building a product that essentially let you hire people in different parts of the world as a kind of employee model. It gets complex fast, but I'll say that this was sort of one approach. It's sometimes called an EOR, or an employee of record model. And with so much demand, we realized this is becoming a crowded space. There's a lot of entrance to the market here. So here I want to highlight the other key ingredient to building winning products, and this is delving into our competitors. Right? And this is to accelerate our own understanding. I think sometimes we're afraid to go watch a customer of a competitor screen share, don't share any sensitive information, but let's go and see what's going on in that product. Not so much from the sense of every single feature that they have, but what's the customer experience of using that product? How well do we understand that? That's what I'm talking about. And that's going to help us really get into a comparative framework as we think about what it is we want to build. So here the work is to know the competitor. And I also want to expand and say by competitor, I mean in the broadest sense. So not only what you might think of as a direct competitor. So first, legacy offerings. There's been a lot of ways to pay people across borders for a long time. These don't necessarily look like, modern SaaS applications, but let's go and see, how does this work and how do our customers sometimes use these methods? Okay, so we looked at legacy offerings, what's in the space already. And then we looked at emergent players. So who's kind of breaking out and what are they doing and what's interesting? And then we wanted to situate that in a larger context. So this to me is critical in almost everything we do, which is what's changing? Because when we build products, they're not going to ship tomorrow, right? Sometimes we are 18 months out. So can we start to think about what might matter? We can't predict the future, but we can sort of look at, well, where are things moving and what might matter in 18 to 24 months from now. If that were true, what would that mean for the plans that we're making today? And if that changed, would we still be on track? Okay, so one of the main insights was understanding the transition of the workforce. This is really key. Often contractors, people who are working sometimes less formally for organizations, but they oftentimes become employees. Remember I said we were going to build to be an employee, but I didn't use the word contractor. So this was a really big aha, that depending on the country, because of compliance and regulatory angles, and also local preferences, right? Think about how currency changes work in some places, right, and stability. So in some geographies, flexibility of payment turned out to be the most important, while in others it was having benefits and status of being an actual, kind of employee. So we were going to have to offer that spectrum from contractor all the way to employee, rather than focus on one part of that journey alone. And this is the part I said at the beginning about knowing your superpowers, right? So fortunately, our product excels in transitions, whereas in other products that's happening actually with an operations team that under the hood is doing a lot of manual work in spreadsheets. Our product could already natively handle those transitions. So this was kind of one of the key things that went into the product. Another example is invoicing and contracts. So if you're a contractor, you might be doing things like sending an invoice to an organization so that you can get paid. And it turned out that people were spending a lot of time sending this off to various organizations and hoping as freelancers that they were going to get paid. So one of our big ahas was oh, we can get in here and do something about it. And again, fortunately, since we knew our superpowers, we have native documents, capabilities and signatures and stuff like that. So we could really leverage that and say, how can we bring invoices into the product? We also have, payroll built out. So we're able to put these things together and think about an invoicing and contracts angle to the product. And finally, we were able to really connect the dots between understanding what we could do versus what some of the emergent breakout players could do. And this we tend to do on almost every single project, which is really to map out competitor strengths and weaknesses and how we sort of land within that. What could we say, right? Think about being on a sales call and the objection handling that a salesperson, an account executive might have with a client who's saying, well, in system A, I heard you can do this thing. What do you offer? So that's something we think about a lot, is well, what would our advantage be? How could we stand out? But also, how would we overcome some of our weaknesses? So the winning product here is our global contractors offering. It provides a wide range of options to pay contractors across 180 countries and has full contract management in our product for both admins, and there's a contractor-facing experience. So I'll pause here and say that that's researching to win. So it starts by knowing the product. And I don't mean on a superficial level. I mean on a deep, deep level, understanding what are your current capabilities, what's on the roadmap of other teams so that you can go out and figure out how to bring those together in new ways. And then going deep into, let's see if I have it here, I do. Going into the periphery and into competitors to bring into focus your advantages and to really point to novel opportunities for winning products. So it's that, right? It's informing those strategic bets that are in relation to our customers and our future customers, really thinking about those use cases, industries, and maybe how our competitors start to stagnate, and also thinking about like what is their next move, right? So that what we're doing is in relation to those changes that we can anticipate. These look very different from the typical validation or empathy exercises that I think a lot of UXR practices are known for. But what I'm willing to bet is that if you move in this direction, right, if you consider these things, if you action on these things, your leadership is going to take notice. So I'll leave it there. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. We do have someone that's actually passing out the remote this time. Do we have a hand? Perfect.
Okay.
Awesome presentation. Thank you so much. I'm really curious. I could imagine a version of those research projects that took 6 months. I could imagine a version that took 3 months. I cannot imagine a version that took like 2 weeks. So I'm really curious about the timelines, and especially how you aligned with engineering and design. Like, what were they doing in the meantime? How did you make room for that at the company? How did you get buy-in about to get these kinds of deep, detailed insights?
We work fast. I think at a lot of organizations, there's the perception that research takes time. To the question that I heard before, my answer would be like, heck yes, we're going to do it in 2 weeks. And we're going to run as hard as it takes to find competitors of, whatever tools. There's scrappy ways to do it. We use, some of the tooling from vendors here today. So that's the first part of your question. So I think this idea that research is slow, like we're out and ahead of so many projects at the organization, often at the request of leadership of the organization. Your other question was about what is design, product engineering doing? They're with us. So we kind of run Safari style and run everything in Slack channels and have them on the calls and sort of in a deep state of exploration with us. Yeah.
Lovely. And then we have the green in front after that. Thanks, Ryan.
I forgot exactly what it said, but early on it was about not validating, kind of breaking things, and I really love that. But I'm curious how you sort of balance that with this perception that research slows us down. If your findings disagree with what you expected to find, or things that a PM wanted validated, how do you sort of balance those things?
Yeah, I would say at the outset of projects, and this might sound truly radical to people living in a different paradigm in the room, but we've been running this way for at least the last 4+ years, that I would say at this point, we're not really ever starting from a hey, research, go validate this thing. So, we're typically starting from a point of hey, we're going to be building, we see some kind of an opportunity. We understand that our customers are trying to do X, Y, and Z. I guess it's hard for me to answer because we've been working this way now for a while, but I guess that's kind of the point, right? The minute you sort of shift gears and show up with something else and show that you can do it, that it's not going to slow things down, people sort of latch on. As far as not slowing things down, I just had an unnamed executive tell me Sunday night, okay, well, we're going to be doing this thing. And yeah, research kind of sounds nice, but it seems like it's going to take a while. And we'll burn the midnight oil by Monday morning. That's today. We had customers on the call. That was the first thing that kicked off this sprint that I'm on right now. So I think it's a lot of it's just how you show up, and are you showing up also maybe with the assumption that hey, it's going to take a while, or this is going to be really hard, or it's going to be a lot of work. Versus just completely, 1000% leaned into I'm going to make this happen and demonstrate, kind of what research can do at its best.
I guess the piece I'd want to push on that is how do you think about prioritization then. Like, with my teams, I don't let them work weekends. So I think about how do I think about ensuring.
Yeah. Oh, to be clear, I mean, I don't know if people from my team are listening. They're not working weekends either. I lead the team, so I can roll however I want. But well, that's the thing, right? Like, whatever hours you work or not, I'd say this, like, start from the place of, like, are you an entrepreneur? Why are you at your current company? Are you I'll just gonna be blunt here. Are you just taking up a seat? Are you here to win for the business? Like, it's not necessarily, I think, running yourself ragged, but it's like, are you in just as much as a PM or an engineer, right? And I think when you take the mindset of like, hey, I really I have an idea. I can see an opportunity. I could see how we could build a scheduling product in a different way to capture a larger market. Like, when you go in that way, it's like, I think you have a sense of ownership, honestly, about the outcome. And so it's less of like, okay, well, this is this versus that, and it's more of a, I'm gonna make this happen. I'm gonna like will it because I believe in it. And I think that that's just coming from a different place of versus like, I think typically there's this sense of like, okay, well, those kinds of projects fall to the bottom of the roadmap or they fall below the line. We consistently show up we do regular planning, show up with like, those are the projects above the line. Those are the projects we put forward as like most important to the business, and we're willing to take a stand when other projects come our way where it's like, well, yeah, you could do that, but like, is that gonna have the same, is that gonna have the same outcome? So.
Love it.
Be brave, tackle the things that, that your company, I think in the end, like even if it feels like you're breaking some of the rules to get there, I guarantee that people will take notice. So.
Thank you. We have our last question.
Oh, am I last? Okay. Thank you for your presentation. It's really insightful. I really like your approach with the competitors. So to find like meaningful or proper like competitors, do you have any practical like recommendation or like tips? Any you can provide some like examples from your case study?
To find competitors?
Yes, to find. Yeah, there's like a lot of.
Do you mean identifying who the competitors are, or identifying customers that use a competitor product?
At the both sides.
Both sides.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of like competitors, right? So you can, I think, get out pretty easily with. I mean, hopefully you know who your main competitors are, but when you're like clicking out, in our case, we have hundreds of competitors as a compound startup that has over 30 products, right? So, I mean, start by asking the people in the room, right? Ask the PM, like, who's the competitor that keeps you up at night? But also look at like, hey, what are the breakout companies, like, recently funded companies that might be doing something different. You can look at big acquisitions as well, like, okay, what's kind of getting interest. So with every project, though, I would suggest like you start with a mapping of who are the competitors, and you can kind of put it on a 2x2, right? Like whether one axis is like legacy versus breakout, maybe one is, you kind of pick a different axis in terms of a user model or something else, but quickly make some quadrants and get a mapping together, and you can iterate on that. As for finding customers, well, you've got some great vendors in this room, write a screener, ask people, what do you use? We ask people to also, here's a one time I use Validate, which is like, if we get on the call and we understand that someone doesn't have knowledge of that product, we understand it's a miss. But we also do our homework in advance to really look at the documentation that's out there of competitor products. Don't be scared to do that. If it's out there, in my opinion, it's yours to look at. And last, sometimes you have to get really scrappy. I mean, we'll just like go friends and family through our sales channel, through other channels at the company that have a lot of people, and say, hey, we're looking to find people who use X, Y, and Z. The last part I'll say is like, if you're in business software, you're often not just looking for someone who has access to the tool, you're looking for people who are admins or buyers. We didn't talk about that today, but that's the other thing to really consider is like, who are you trying to find? And the more niche you're looking for, right? So like a system admin of name your biggest competitor, like that's gonna be hard, but we insist on it in every project, so.
Thank you so
Awesome.
much. Thanks so much, Jenny. I'm now super excited to introduce one of my former colleagues, Jessica. She'll be here in just a second. I'm pretty sure it's you. Is there a break? Alec? Maggie? We're going to get mic'd up. In the meantime, who's got a Q&A on growth? Who can throw me a question real quick to make this seem more organic? Heck yeah. Say it loud and I'll repeat it.
Yeah, so I was just curious, in the previous examples, so sometimes when there's a thread unfolding and you go out and you want to investigate an opportunity, what you end up learning is, yikes, to succeed would actually be way more difficult than you thought. The opportunity isn't quite there than you thought. And I was just curious to hear any examples of that happening and how you
Yeah, the question is what happens when you dive into a growth opportunity and it's like way bigger and scarier than maybe you thought and maybe even that you had support for. So I actually used to work for Lyft, the ride-sharing company, and as none of you probably know, we had a rental car product for 2 years that I ran. It was rad. And this was really one of those examples. We saw it as a huge opportunity to expand into something called TaaS, or Transportation as a Service, and think of Lyft not only for your rideshare, but your bikes and your bus and your car rentals. And we worked on that product for quite a long time. Also, if anybody knows anything about rental cars, almost none of them are profitable. And when they are, it's off of insurance. So the reason that they're pushing you on that so hard is not necessarily because you need it, though you should have some of it. It's because they don't make money any other way. So it was very much one of those opportunities where it said like, oh shoot. And I think you do have two opportunities there. One is to pick a piece of that. I think you'd be surprised how often you might not be able to take on the whole thing, but you can take on a chunk. And as a researcher, your opportunity with growth is to hone in on what that chunk is, what makes the most sense right now, either through your findings or through your partnerships or both. And the other is occasionally to back out, right? You might have invested a lot of things. We have something called the sunk cost fallacy. We see this in our lives all the time where we say, but I've already invested millions. Great, don't throw good money after bad. A piece of being a researcher sometimes is stepping back and being like, hey, this actually isn't a great idea. It's not advancing what we're trying to do. And that really goes back to Constantine's piece is, are you associated with the North Star? For Lyft, TaaS was a way to generate increased and more stable revenue. It wasn't doing that, so it's an opportunity to say, okay, we're gonna try something else. But making sure you're aligned there, not necessarily as a researcher, where I was like, this is an amazing user experience, which it was, that product was rad. But how do we make sure we're tracking to the same thing? Thank you. And with that, I'm really excited and totally organically ready to introduce Jessica Palmer, staff researcher at YouTube. Sorry, I almost said Google.
Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here chatting with you all today about research for 0 to 1 growth and ways you can better help unlock those first dollars from new paid experiences. So my name is Jessica. I'm currently a staff UX researcher, and for the past 8 years at Google, I've largely been focused on new growth initiatives. I've helped drive 0 to 1 paid experiences across multiple paid products like YouTube TV, NFL Sunday Ticket, and Jules on YouTube. And today, I'm going to share a little bit more about what I've learned over the years working on these types of experiences. To do that, first, I'm going to talk about the challenges. So what's hard about going 0 to 1? Then we'll dive into a toolkit of research methods for tackling some of those challenges. Then I'll share with you some final takeaways and tips. So starting with the challenges. You're all skilled researchers. You know your users, you understand their needs, behaviors, your core value props, and the key jobs to be done, the fundamental reasons why people would use your product in the first place. But do you know your users as buyers? I'm gonna guess that many of us could be doing a little bit better in this area. And getting users to give you that first dollar is actually a different challenge than understanding how users interact with core product features. So instead, you need to think about how they think about purchasing, their motivations to buy, and their behaviors around online transactions. It's a whole different lens through which to understand your users, and this can be a little bit difficult at first. Another challenge of going 0 to 1 is that, as other people have said, this can feel messy, right? There's usually very clear, short deadlines along with a lot of unknowns. You are usually finding yourself building your research roadmap as all of the core growth flows and maybe even paid product flows are being built at the exact same time. So you need to develop a roadmap quickly to have impact. And conversion suddenly becomes top of mind. And your team often has lots of questions. These are the 3 big questions I consistently see teams grappling with when it comes to 0 to 1 experiences. And these are things around things like pricing preferences, buyer definition, as well as purchase optimizations. And with all of these tight deadlines, it can feel really easy to fall back on familiar methods like traditional concept testing, usability testing, and user interviews, maybe all combined into a single session because you really feel, equipped to save yourself time. And while these methods have their place, relying only on them can sometimes lead to more reactive research planning. And in my experience, they can lead to short-lived insights that have less impact, and maybe even at times unreliable. But we can shift our approach towards creating more evergreen insights. So today, I'm gonna give you a research toolkit or a way to answer these common monetization questions in a more proactive way that'll help deliver that strategic impact that we're looking for. And each method I'm going to share today, I've personally used with teams in order to help answer these questions. Okay, but before we jump in, let's clarify a little bit about what going 0 to 1 means. So this talk will help anyone who's on a team who's working towards creating new revenue streams. So this can be something like launching your first paid tier or one-time transaction. This can also mean things like adding a new paid feature on top of an existing paid experience. Or even if you are a researcher on a pretty established paid product, this can also mean that you can deepen your team's understanding of paid users in order to prioritize future 0 to 1 experiences. So user research also is important in each one of these because each of these experiences, which are growth experiences, are ultimately user-facing ones. Okay, and now to start thinking about these growth experiences and how we can help guide teams more effectively, let's clearly now define each one of these 3 key questions that our toolkit needs to help us answer. And I'm gonna start with pricing. So when it comes to pricing, teams are really eager to optimize their pricing strategies. You'll often hear a lot of questions like, how do users think about paid versus no-charge features? How will users respond to this price that we're gonna put out? And how much are users really willing to pay for X feature or subscription? And to address these pricing questions, I'm gonna discuss 4 methods of varying complexity. I'm not going to do a deep dive into any of these methods, but instead, I will focus on a key application of each one, the outcome you can get from it, and hopefully encourage you to go learn more about them in depth on your own. So let's imagine your team needs help optimizing potential paid potential feature and pricing combinations for launch. Conjoins are a great way to help with this. In a choice-based conjoint, like you're seeing here, participants choose their preferred option from a potential randomization of like feature and price pairings that your team is considering. And the output of this allows you to see how users value the individual features that make up a larger feature or a subscription, and help you understand the trade-offs that users make during the comparison. So this is really powerful, but conjoints can be really complex and intricate to design. So if you want to try them out, consider asking for help the first time. If you want to try something a little bit less complex, still related to pricing, you can consider trying a pricing sensitivity meter. In this type of method, participants are asked to identify usually 4 different pricing perceptions that kind of indicate their value around it, around a potential paid product. And this helps teams avoid pricing something too low, which can maybe cause like concerns for quality, or too high, which can create pricing barriers. And it really helps to identify that acceptable range for baseline pricing. And a pricing sensitivity meter like this is actually pretty easy for teams to understand its output, which makes it a really great place to start. But what if your goal isn't to find the exact price? There are still ways to help inform general pricing and help you better understand user mental models around paid features. And so I'm going to cover some of those now. You could run a max diff, for example. Here, participants could see things like potential paid features, and they choose only one most and least important feature from each set. A max diff won't tell you, though, how much users are willing to pay, but it can help teams determine which paid features are of highest value or interest to your users relative to each other. And you can also take these results and just feed them into that conjoint that I was just talking about, or just use it to help inform general perception, right, of pricing. So each of these 3 methods now we've discussed help us understand what users want, but they don't tell us why. So our final method here is card sorts, which can provide that rich qualitative understanding of how users perceive pricing structures. So when users are sorting potential features into various groups like this, you can uncover mental models for different pricing structures, or even just how users perceive the difference between paid and no charge features. This will help you uncover important whys, like why they group certain features together, which features they perceive to be more basic versus advanced, as well as the reasoning behind each placement. And overall, card sorts can really help align your team's pricing structures with users' just general mental models. Okay, so these 4 methods for pricing will help you deliver more reliable willingness to pay insights, as well as help equip your team with a clear understanding of users' mental models and preferences towards pricing. Okay, moving on to our second key question for 0 to 1 growth, which is who will buy it? So teams want to better understand users' buy-in needs and preferences to ensure they're optimizing across the commercial journey. They often have questions like, who are our customers? Which customers should we target? And how do these users make these purchases today? So you need a framework to think about your users as buyers. And let's align on some basic, what I'll call basic, buyer segments you can use as part of any UXR roadmap to do this. A fundamental starting segment to think about is first-time versus returning buyers. These users often have unique behaviors and needs. So for first-time buyers, consider prioritizing questions like, what triggers that first purchase? And what hurdles do they need to overcome in order to move forward? You can even ask like returning buyers to recall their first-time purchase in order to get at some of that data. And remember that returning buyers here, because again, we're talking about 0 to 1, they could either be people who have just purchased on your platform a different paid experience, or they can even just be people who have previously bought a paid experience in general, like in the market that you're trying to capture. And these experienced buyers can also be really great for gathering useful insights on how to optimize past 0 to 1 launch. A second buyer segment to explore here are casual versus big spenders. And this segmentation is about more than just how much people spend. It's about understanding their general purchasing behaviors, asking questions like, how often are they purchasing? How much and why? And how do these different buying patterns reflect back to the core product usage? And we want to ensure that the user experience we're designing meets those needs. Each of those questions, too, kind of sound a little bit more one-timey, but you can adapt them to be adapt the questions to fit for subscriptions. And it's important to remember here, too, that these buyer segments can be fluid. So a casual spender might opt to make a larger purchase or upgrade to a higher tier if the right moment arrives, and vice versa. And it's also really important to remember that you need to understand both, because both casual and big spenders contribute to revenue in different but important ways. And a final basic buyer segment here to consider is purchasing habits by different devices. So different devices offer different buying experiences, and users tend to have existing preferences and behaviors around each one. Key questions you can explore here include things like, what devices do they own? Which devices do they normally purchase on, and why? And how do behaviors or needs differ across devices? Okay, so now that we've reviewed 3 key ways you can think about buyer segments for any growth experience, what are some of the methods we can use to learn more about these users? I'm going to discuss 2 here, which are surveys or large surveys and diary studies. Both of these can be paired with user interviews as you need and if you need to go deeper. But let's start with one of my favorite methods, which are diary studies. I'm going to assume most people here are familiar with diary studies, but here's how I use them in order to gather buyer segment needs. So first, start with recruiting across multiple buyer types, like we just talked about. I try to aim for about N of 20 per segment. And remember, your segments can overlap. So one participant could be like a first-time buyer, desktop purchaser, and casual spender. Then prompt users to naturally capture those relevant purchase decision moments as they occur. And then the output and those logs that you get of all those rich stories and behaviors are really great for building archetypes for each buyer segment that includes things like conversion insights, purchasing behaviors, and any obstacles that they might encounter. So diary studies are really great for understanding contextual needs. But what if you want more nuanced buyer segments at a really broad scale? That's where segmentation surveys can help. So I'll discuss 2 types. Consumer segmentation surveys really gather this really wide range of inputs, so anywhere from things like needs, behaviors, attitudes, demographics, to create these distinct consumer profiles in a more holistic way. An example, let's pretend if you're a subscription product, you might get someone like this mindful digital minimalist. They kind of have cool names like this too, which is kind of fun to get out of these. Maybe this person is someone who prefers fewer high quality subscription services. They regularly review their spending and they value really intentional purchasing. So that can be great, but what if you want something a little bit more focused? You could instead try something like a buy driver segment. And these segments are a little bit more often pinpointed around value drivers for your product. So if you, say, work in online shopping, you might get a segment like this, the loyalty rewards maximizer, who are really driven by points or exclusive discounts. And both of these surveys can be really powerful and offer these more nuanced ways of looking at your buyer segments. But again, these are pretty complex surveys, so seek help from an expert before you try them out on your own. All right, and both of these methods will help you deliver more evergreen buyer archetypes as well as give you a really deep understanding of various buyer segment needs to influence not only that MVP 0 to 1 launch, but also future ones. Okay, moving on to our final question for 0 to 1 growth. How well do flows convert? Teams tend to have a bunch of questions around this area. They want to know, how can we optimize the purchase flow? What are the points of the purchase flow that we see drop off, or why are we seeing drop off here? And as a user researcher, answering these questions means helping our teams identify those flows which satisfy both the business goals, like conversion optimization, as well as our users' goals, which are usually things like high-level UX metrics that your team has identified. But when testing purchase flows, how often do we take the time to consider if we're using the right method to evaluate them that works for our team's needs and our own time? Usability testing answers, can users complete the purchase flow, focusing on things like errors and task success. This is valuable. But for 0 to 1 initiatives, using pretty established purchasing patterns, major usability errors are probably going to be identified by your team's analytics, or you could probably find them in a heuristic evaluation. Overinvestment here can sometimes lead to short-lived insights. And I've been there, and I'm sure many of you have too. So a more strategic 0 to 1 question to answer aligned to conversion isn't can users complete the purchase flow, but will they? And this points us to preference testing methods for when you want to compare different flows against each other, or just understand how well a single design performs. So here you might be instead focusing things on like sentiment, appeal, comprehension to help inform purchase intention. And generally, small n qual tests to definitively pick a winning design, as we know, or predict broad purchase intention aren't very reliable. So let's explore a few different ways we can do this. The best way to assess conversion is through live experiments. And often our teams set these up for us, but our teams are busy trying to build the actual flows, right? Especially for a 0 to 1 launch. So there aren't always resources to run every single live experiment that our teams want. That's where UXR can help step in and narrow down potential designs to move forward with for experiments and initial launch. I'm going to share 2 examples of methods I've used to do this, starting with scaled concept test time in a single study. First, align with your team on a few key UX metrics that are relevant to purchase intention that you want to use. Then, recruit a large number of participants, somewhere like each concept individually on those metrics, and provide like-qual feedback. And this can be a little bit intricate, so make sure you account for things like ordering bias and participant fatigue, because, as I said, a dozen's a lot, right? But this larger N boosts confidence in results, enabling really powerful visualizations and comparisons to identify the best designs the team should move forward with and why. But what if your team only really has like 1 or 2 designs that they're considering for launch? You might not need something this intricate. Here is where I would recommend concept testing, but in a manner that really, really hones in your questions and participants. So to emphasize this difference, I'm going to call this targeted concept testing. First, identify those 1 to 2 buyer segments that you really care about for first-time or returning users, and recruit around N of 20 of each type to ensure you get enough depth in mental models. Then consider just a few key comprehension and sentiment questions to ask about, tied specifically to conversion needs for those buyer segments. At the end, you can create these scorecards for each design and for each buyer segment. And while these scorecards aren't really for making statistical claims, insights at this scale will help you reach more stable and reoccurring themes, highlighting potential optimizations and the whys behind them. The testing methods, you'll be able to provide more rate towards launch. And this in turn will, importantly, give your teams more confidence in the designs selected, for experiments and also help inform the next phase of launches. All right, we just covered a lot of different research methods that you can use to guide your teams on these 0 to 1 initiatives. What would it look now to put these methods into practice? Which roadmap? Let's pretend you have 8 months to launch. You just were given the mandate, and they're like, we're going to launch the end of Q3, and it's January. Here's one way your research roadmap could look. You could start with a card sort to identify how users think about different potential paid features. You could then use those results as input into a conjoint that maybe actually a different team is running. Maybe you partner with marketing and you hand it off to them. That way it frees up your time. You have more impact, but you can also do more. So while that's running, you actually set up your own diary study and user interviews to better understand your buyer segments and their needs. Let's say maybe that's the first 3 months. Now, you can switch gears to optimizing those buy flows. You could run back-to-back scaled concept tests to quickly iterate through a whole bunch of design variations and narrow down to that key set of designs. And then at the end, towards launch, I'd work with your team to identify that narrower set of designs that you ultimately want to launch with, and that can be set up as experiments. But what if your team is actually looking to launch much faster than this? Let's pretend you're more in the 8 weeks. So I hope you're not in this situation, but what if we can make this happen? So I'd follow the same principles, but adapt. I'd keep the diary study, maybe drop the user interviews, and I'd run it first to make sure you get those buyer segments needs back ASAP. And then while the diary is running, I'd set up a max diff or a pricing sensitivity meter. These are less complex to set up and analyze, and you can still help your team inform different pricing strategies with them. And that's probably going to take you at least 5 weeks. In the remaining time, you can then set up a targeted concept test to ensure that the flow is optimized for your first-time buyers. All right, we covered a lot today, so to wrap things up, I'm going to recap with a few big takeaways. So first, we started off discussing some of the challenges of 0 to 1 growth, and we talked about the 3 top questions you'll encounter when conducting this type of research, including things like pricing preferences, uncovering buyer segments, and purchase flow optimizations, as well as how you can uncover needs and opportunities by exploring these things from a buyer-specific lens. We then walk through various methods or our 0 to 1 UXR toolkit that you can try in the future to help you answer each of those questions in a more targeted and reliable way. And lastly, we reviewed a few example roadmaps, which I hope can serve as a blueprint for ways to consider approaching your next 0 to 1 project with more confidence. Okay, and as you get started on this journey, here are a few final tips. First, stay curious. Consider which method is the right one to really answer your question and for your resources and time. Is there a method you can use that will take you beyond just that initial launch and help your insights be more strategic and evergreen? Second, get creative with your methods. I showed a lot here, but don't be afraid to pair them or try them out in different ways. So I know a lot of the things that I too said seemed much larger, N of 20 for things, but really you can think about it in different ways, right? So right now you typically tend to run 45-minute or 60-minute interviews, but can you do a 20-minute? And get the key insights that you need in that time and get the scale that you want. And lastly, I push yourself to evaluate your next recruit carefully. I encourage you to try recruiting primarily based on those potential buyer segments that we covered, because you might be surprised by what you learn. And with that, I hope you feel inspired to get to know your buyers just as well as you know your users today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And for those of you out there going, there's no way she operates with this much rigor all the time. She does, and it blows me away. I used to fangirl her reports and read every single one. Yeah. So, yeah. We are We are running a little bit over, so we're just going to take one question, and then we'll find them after. Abraham.
Yeah, thanks for that talk. My name is Ibrahim. My question is, how would this talk change or stay the same if your buyers are not spending cash? What if they're spending time, and that's where your monetization comes from?
Interesting. I think you can still apply a lot of the things in the right. I think the main takeaway I wanted to get people to think about is this other lens, right, to think about your users through. Sometimes it can be really easy to be caught up in the same way and of looking at our users and being like, feel like you already know a lot, which we do, right? We do, but I always think there's this unique challenge in being able to think about our users through a different lens. And so what I encourage you to think about is, what is that different lens for time? Is there a different matrix you can set up to think about those needs?
Yeah, amazing. Also, I think all of you subtly heard me incorrectly call Ibrahim. Please call him by his preferred name and not what I called him. We now have a 25-ish minute break. We'd love it if you guys were back here at 55 after, just to give us some time to settle down. Constantine, if you would raise your hand. Jenny, I don't know where you're off to, if you would raise your hand if you're here. And Jessica, so they're here for questions, as are all of our amazing sponsors, one of which has some sort of pickleball thing going on, so definitely check that out. And we'll see you back here at 2:55. Thank you all.
Susie. Respondents simply spend up to 10 minutes chatting with me. What's your biggest financial goal this year?
Saving up to renovate my kitchen.
Thanks for sharing. Why is that so important to you?
The kitchen is the heart of the home. My family always gathers there.
Welcome to a new era in conversational research.
User interviews is the fastest and easiest way to recruit participants for research. We're known for fast matching, a high-quality audience, and a simple workflow that researchers love. Start for free at userinterviews.com.
In a work world that's more disconnected and remote, how do we, as researchers, build trust? How do we get our partners to understand that our research can help teams reach new heights? Well, we know it's not through PDFs and presentations. Even the most thorough research isn't enough to build that trusted connection, to get you a seat at the table. What builds connections is stories, experiences, and feelings. Feelings you really get when you're there. When your stakeholders see you uncover a great insight live, they see the magic of research, and they see you. Because when it comes to research, seeing is believing. Turn research skeptics into research champions with Look Back.
Unless you're Gus, you can keep standing. Butts in seats. We got so much cool stuff to hear about. It was a really interesting study that looked at like what the tipping point was of when things started to change, and it was about 25%. And as about 30% of you sat down, it started to quiet down, and it was very fun to see that in action. But let me see the other 70%. Awesome. Thank you all. So for our next talk, we have our very own Gus Griffin, who's going to be talking about exactly research for long horizon growth. But I think we all had a little conversation earlier before he got here about something that was happening today. So if you could join me on 3. Happy birthday, Gus! Woo! Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you,
Enjoy.
Zoe. Thank you, thank you. Zoe's amazing, isn't she? Let's give Zoe a round of applause. Okay, amazing. My name is Gus. I have a long title, but really what I do is I do research on new products at Figma. And basically what that looks like is I'm doing really exploratory research kind of in front of building teams. And I want to talk about what researching for longer horizon growth looks like. And like a lot of research, it starts with a question. How do we use research to help our teams figure out where to go next? How do we do research that helps orient your teams around new products, new markets, new categories of tools or products, and new audiences? And I think we're really well positioned as researchers to bring clarity like this to our businesses. So when we think about research today, right, a lot of us work in 2 buckets. We work in 0 to 1 research, or we work in 1 to 100 research. So in 0 to 1 research, we're asking the question, how do we build this? How do we optimize this tool from the outset? And in 1 to 100 research, we're asking, how do we make this better iteratively over time? And both are really, really important. But let's take a step back. How many people have ever been working on a 0 to 1 project or a 1 to 100 project and asked themselves, why are we building this? I've had that same experience. And the worst case is you're actually building the wrong thing. And so I want to advocate for a new type of research that we can all start to try to do more of and create space for in our teams, in our businesses, to continue to drive impact in the narrative that we can do a lot as research teams. What I want to advocate for is us answering more of the question of, should we build this and why? I call this scout investigation. Shout out to my manager who came up with this term. Scout investigation is about getting in front of your building teams. It's about digging really deep, and before we commit any resources, can we actually say, should we build this and why? What should we build if so, and how can we do it? And to do this, we have to start stepping outside of our comfort zones, right? We have to go out into the world and really pursue new, interesting ideas and bring them back home to our business and really drive a new perspective among our leadership teams. So today, I'm going to get into what Scout investigation is all about. I'm going to get into some ways that I do this, and I'm going to leave us with a call to action. So with my teams, a lot of the time, when we're thinking about a new space, the question we ask is there a there there? The question, is there a there there, is really shorthand for, is there an opportunity in a new frontier we want to go after? And the role research can play in that is about identifying an opportunity in a new frontier. And there are really 3 things that determine if a there is indeed there. The first one is need, and that's about people. What do people actually want to achieve and why? Identifying a there there also requires understanding of the market landscape. What do people consider buying? How do they choose those things? And the third is about differentiation, which has a lot to do with storytelling. So what's actually missing today, and how could we do it better? I think you look at these 3 things, these are 3 types of questions we all try to answer daily about our tools, and we're really well suited to do this. The best part is, what do we get when we do each of those 3 things? What do we get when we answer those questions? When we focus on need and people, we can actually bring a lot of product focus around the areas we actually want to build into, from first principles. When we focus on the market, we actually bring a really deep and human understanding to the competitive landscape. And we say, hey, there's actually a bigger story here, and this is why the market is moving this way. This is why things are changing, because this is what's happening in people's lives. And when we think about differentiation, we're actually painting a picture of how to win, right? We're telling a really compelling story. We're offering a provocative perspective about how to move forward. And you put these 3 things together, and what you get and what you're providing as a researcher is a strategic direction before you even get to building that thing. And what I think is really cool about this little chart here is that need and product focus helps you serve your product teams. Differentiation and how to win also helps your product teams, but it also helps your marketing teams. It tells them a story about what's happening in the market. And the market and competitive landscape actually builds in inroads to make impact with your strategic finance teams, your biz op teams, all of that. So you're answering 3 questions that can have impact across your entire business. So there are 3 things I do to get to the core of these questions. I take an outside-in approach, I do needs-based market mapping, and I bring really opinionated storytelling. We'll go through each one by one. So the outside-in approach. The way I think about this is that an outside-in approach really forces us to look at the world around our products and not just our product. You look at this tiny little dot, that's your product. In my case, that's Figma. There's a lot going on around the world that doesn't have anything to do with Figma. And if we want to think about long horizon growth, we have to look outside for those opportunities to grow. We have to push everyone in our companies to see the bigger picture. We have to look outside our users, like Jenny talked about, right? We have to look for the emerging behaviors, the early adopters of new tools, to help paint a picture of where things may be heading. And what we have to do is we have to really decenter our products from the discussion. And today, not a lot of us are encouraged to take this outside-in approach. We want to see the world through our users' eyes, and that's super valuable. But when we want to get ahead and start saying, where do we need to go next? Those users may not have the answers. And in fact, I would argue there's a whole lot of other people that are going to be more impactful in determining if you're going to be successful in your longer horizon bets. And ultimately, why we do this is because internally, our teams bring with them a lot of assumptions about how the world works, right? I'm sure all of you have that experience of saying, like, I don't know if that's the right assumption. And this type of research is to say, well, let's paint a different picture of reality then. And we can only do that when we take an outside-in approach, when we say, I know you think it works this way, but I'm doing the research and I'm telling you it's actually a little bit different. So let's take a couple of examples, right? Say you want to build a new product that's all about developers, and you're really excited about building this developer tool, and you're like, all right, I'm going to take an outside-in approach. I'm going to go there before you even start building, and I'm going to meet a bunch of developers, and you say, hey, this is a great way to get in. And then you do the research, and you realize it's not even a developer tool. It's a design tool. Still really core in your workflow, but you're reimagining the world, and actually what's happening there is, well, your buyer is going to be totally different. And you might build and architect the product totally different if you know that a designer is the buyer versus the developer. So you've already restructured reality. Or say you want to go into a new space and you're like, wow, okay, design systems are amazing. Everybody loves design systems. People are so stoked on design systems. And you want to make a different tool. And design systems are going to be your differentiator. Great, let's do it. Okay, outside-in approach, before they start building, you go out, no one knows what a design system is. And you're restructuring the world and what matters around people's experiences outside of your product. And then you're able to take those and say, well, maybe we don't need to build this product with the design system in mind from first principles. Maybe we can do it differently. And you're already moving the needle and pushing. But we can only do that if we dump everything we know about our products, everything we think is most valuable, and take this outside-in approach. The second thing I do in this type of scout investigation is needs-based market mapping. Okay, it sounds like a lot, but bear with me. This is an example of how you may see a lot of business analysts map a market. So think of all the products here, their tools, in whatever market, new market you're exploring. And they may map things by, okay, these are the high quality products, these are the high price products. You put them on there, you see, okay, we've got a good understanding of what's going on in this market. But I would say, do you really? Do you really know why they're commanding a high price point? Do you really know what quality means? Right? And in this chart, look at all the white space. It's down in high price, low quality. Is that the opportunity? Probably not. And we have to do better, and our companies have to do better. We have to peel back and say, okay, what would actually command a high price point, right? Or what actually drives quality? Because we actually need to think about where is the opportunity? And researchers can actually paint that. We can paint that by understanding people, and then we can reorient and remap the market. So how I do this in research, right? I try to think about I do primarily qualitative research, by the way, some quant. But what I try to do in my projects is I try to figure out what are, let's say, the two most important things about the new market or category that I'm investigating. The two things that drive behavior, that drive purchase, that really drive love of these tools. So let's say instead of high quality, what you actually discover is people have this need around design capability, right? And the tools in the market can either deliver really, really powerful design capability, or maybe there's a limited design capability. You're already reorienting what quality is around what you're delivering to users. And let's say, instead of price, what we really see is that there's also this big spectrum that people have on their ability to learn how to use these tools. So you have a really high learning curve and a really low learning curve. And you map this into a 2x2, and you start to say, wow, how do the tools in the market actually serve these needs? And then you see, okay, there's actually a number of tools that deliver really powerful design capability, but they're really hard to use. And okay, there are some that are high learning curve and limited design capable. We don't want to do that. But what you actually identify in here is that in the need, there's a gap. There's not powerful design capability, and there's not a low learning curve. And what we're doing is we're reframing this market around the core needs so that our business leaders can actually know what would we need to build in this space, what we need to go and do. And once we do this and have the overarching frame, we can take it further, right? We can understand also the capabilities and the features we need to build. Don't worry about the text on this slide, it's just an example. This is 25 different capabilities in a market, in a tool category, let's say, or a product category, that are like the kind of tried and true things. These appear on everyone's website. We get this through doing easy competitive teardowns. I don't know about you, but I don't do 25 things in one product pretty much ever. So what really matters? And the thing is, a team that might build is going to look at all these 25 things and be like, oh, we got to build everything. But actually what we can do is we can take these 25 things, taking our outside-in approach, we can go to people, we can show them to people. They can tell us what they use, then they can rank them of all the things they use, and they can tell, why did I rank it in this way? And then all of a sudden, what you have is a prioritized list of the core capabilities you need to build if you're going to go into a new space. This is a lot of the time what it looks like. There's only 5 things that actually matter, the core capabilities that you'd actually need to build. And so when we're doing this needs-based market mapping to explain what matters most and why, we're providing a cut line. We're providing an orientation to the market. And we're helping our teams actually zero in on what matters most to build, right? And let's talk about opinionated storytelling. This one I think is a little maybe provocative for us sometimes. Because in research, what I see a lot of the time, and I'm guilty of it too, is that we fall into this trap of just reporting the data and maybe giving a few recommendations, and that's great, but we have to go further. We have to really start to think about when we do this research really deeply, when we take an outside-in approach and we understand these users, when we do needs-based market mapping, what we're doing is we're building a case. We're building a case on should we go for it or should we not. And it needs to be the bull case or the bear case, but it needs to be a case. The second thing, and a couple of my colleagues presenting earlier today talked about it, we also need to think about if we're painting that case, how are we actually reframing the opportunity we're uncovering? If we're just going to validate something with this type of research, we shouldn't have done the research, hands down. If we're just going to tell them the confirming thing, like, oh, go do this, it doesn't matter. We have to introduce some nuance if we want to have a role in longer horizon growth. Because that's where opportunity exists for our CEOs, our business teams. They're trying to see what's the angle here. We need to bring that to them. And you have to pull no punches. We are all, I'm sure of it, really nice, really empathetic people. We can talk to anybody. I know that. We can't give them the sugar-coated answer. When we go out there and we find if something's working, if something's not working, we owe it to our teams, to our companies that we work for, that we're maybe shareholders in, to actually say, this is a bad idea. Don't do it. Please stop. And we can only do this with really opinionated storytelling. We have to give them the real. Here's an example from what I did once. Everyone was super excited about an opportunity. They were like, Gus, go do the research. This is going to be a slam dunk. I was like, awesome. I'm going to go do the research. I did the research. I was like, oh, uh-oh. And I took an opportunity that we estimated, and I shrunk it by 90%. after I did the research. And I was not very popular. But I told them anyway. And I defended it. I used examples from my research. I told the stories that made them buy into it and start to understand the market in a new way. I reframed it, right? I pulled no punches. I built maybe a bear case. And I think what's important about that is we have to think, when we're thinking about longer term growth, when we're thinking about all the different opportunities in front of your company to build up a new product line, a new service, a new feature, whatever it may be, they're weighing their options. Our CEOs, our C-suites, our leaders, they're weighing their options between 4, 5, 6 different things they could do, right? You can only do that with really opinionated storytelling. So there's 3 things for this scout investigation to think, should we build this and why? The outside-in approach, right? We have to go out into the world and understand what's around our products. We have to decenter our products from the discussion and think bigger picture. What's going on out there? Needs-based market mapping. We have to stop thinking in terms of just quality and price and feed it into that narrative. We actually need to be researchers and paint and explain the why behind the market and really drive that perspective. And in opinionated storytelling, we have to assert our perspectives and put a stake in the ground. And I'm sure, like many of you, I've been in meetings with my managers or my directors, and they're like, okay, now put the research aside and tell me what it means. We need to do more of that. Tell them what it means. Set down the research and then back it up with the data. And honestly, this feels super vulnerable, right? This doesn't feel easy all the time. It doesn't feel good all the time, but you're putting yourself out there. You're going for it. You're going into a new space, a territory that a lot of people have assumptions and think they understand, and you're pushing back and trying to bring a new way of understanding. And you know what? No one else is doing this. Like, all the innovation happening, right, in software. People are getting their news from like Twitter and comments of a few users and VCs and weird product releases and all that stuff, but they have no idea what's actually happening with people in their lives. We need to be those people that represent that perspective amid really rapid change. It's not easy. But the question for you is, can we describe to our CEOs, our VPs, our directors, why a different product is winning in a space or not? Where the market may be heading? What's happening in people's lives? We can own that question all the time. That's our question. So if you take nothing else away from this talk, and I hope you take something away, but just take this message. Really become the person people go to and ask in your company, what the hell is going on out there? What do we do? And where's the there? We can advise, we can counsel, we can put a stake in the ground, and we can start to feed into how we decide where are our long-term growth opportunities. What should we invest in, what should we not, before we even get to 0 and 1. Thank you.
Gus, always great to hear you talk. I had the privilege of managing Gus for 6 months or so, which was the easiest management job of my life because I just let him go, and so exciting to see that continue to show up here. Let's start with the audience before I take this over. Who has the mic right now? Spectacular. It's actually this woman. What's your name? Giselle. Straight through here. Thank you.
Hi, thanks so much for your talk. It was really amazing. I also do some research related to long-term growth for my company, and I was wondering, what's your approach when it comes to the findings of a growth-focused research to then be put into practice? One of the things that I run into, and I'm curious to hear your perspective here, is that we go ahead, we do the research, we have the findings, but then we have to have a systematic way of having multiple advocates for that idea apart from ourselves, the research team, for it to really land. So I'm wondering, what's your tactic when it comes to connecting the findings to actual products?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's 2 parts. There's the upfront work, and then there's after. I think the upfront work and where I feel really, really lucky at Figma is that I've got a really close relationship from the start. That was kind of part of the mandate of my role, to work with the business teams and some of the corporate development teams. And that's really helped, and I've formed really great relationships with them, so we're actually driving this perspective together. This perspective is a joint perspective that we deliver, and they come along for the research ride in a big way, and that really helps. We also always have a product person involved, and they're usually at the director or the VP level, which is really lucky. But sometimes they're not. And what is really important is making sure that you understand, like, what are the key things they'd be thinking about building when you go into it. And then you do the research and you go off and you come back. And what I find is that, and there's some colleagues of mine in the room, like, I end up making a lot of different deliverables, like a ton. There's like the overarching business perspective, and then there's, okay, some questions about that, and you create another one about clarifying, and there's some questions about that. And then you create another one that's just about the product or the key differentiators that you'd want. Or you cut that up and you put it into other people's work. So I find that sometimes the holistic, deliverable of what I find in some of these reports doesn't make sense, but if I cut it up and put it into conversations that other people are having, it can be really impactful. So don't feel like you have to hold on to your whole report. Take a couple of key slides and throw them at people.
I think one of the things that really stands out to me is what we've heard today from Jenny, from Gus, is there's a lot of different ways to run a team. And if I might ask, does anyone feel like their team is appropriately staffed with UX research? Like you have plenty of it, right? So chances are you have a huge chance, even if you don't think about it, to go around to your leaders and say, hey, like we've been running with this embedded approach, but I think we should think more of a core approach or a distributed approach or a partnership approach. And you'd be surprised how often they're like, cool, let's give it a try. And it's worked really well for Figma. It's clearly worked really well for Jenny's team. So don't forget that it's not just the methods and the projects you get to choose. You can start to push for how you want to see your teams run. I think, do you still have the mic? Okay. It was right next to her, though, actually. Thank you.
Hi, great talk. You touched on this a little bit, but what if the reason for building the thing is the CEO or leadership wants it built? And the culture is imposing a vision rather than adjusting on reality. How do you kind of start making that reality testing more appealing?
Yeah. Maybe a slight addendum to the opinionated storytelling is really creative storytelling. And how do you work around some of the blockers and the things in your organization to build a really like solid, foundationally user-centric experience, right? And the chances are that if you're getting that tops-down message that this is the way we have to do it, there's probably other people on your teams that are also like, I don't know if we should do it this way. And you have to creatively problem solve around some of those things, right? And sometimes you just have to disagree and commit. And when you disagree and commit, I don't think it means going down a path that's not right. Like, right, the worst case outcome is your CEO is super angry that it doesn't work. So how do you work within those confines and figure out, like, who do I collaborate with? How do we creatively tell the story and try to move this a little more closely in line with reality and not just build based on our assumptions that may be wrong?
I think we'll hear about this more in the next talk, but disagree, commit, and measure. Like,
yeah.
Commit to what you think makes important and make sure you're keeping an eye on it. Don't let future write it for you. I'm also struck, I think your example with design systems was really interesting here because my husband is a design systems person, so he has a very clear bias and excitement when Figma launched that. I'm curious, how do you balance when you have these things that, like, there actually is a very known use case, it might not be very big, and when you're using that outside-in approach, how do you balance those two types of kind of super user versus every user?
Yeah, definitely. Whew, that's a great question. It's a hard one because when you have those really valuable things, everyone wants to hear more about them. And so what I try to do is I always try to have a pool of the people that are already bought in. Always bring those people along for the ride because eventually they help you create a bigger juxtaposition with maybe the world outside of your product. So if you're going to look at a brand new audience that has no connection to your tool or your product or whatever, take that audience and definitely explore it, and then satisfy the needs of everybody else and look at your power users or look at those super users, and then you can actually see how different they are from one another. And I think that's been really important for me. It's like always draw on the core people, but then you can really create a stark contrast.
Yeah, I love that. I think especially with systems, it's something people need but don't want.
Yep.
So how do you get them in? I love that. I do think we have time for at least one more. In the white up front, please. Thank you.
Hi, Gus. I'm Eleanor. Thanks so much for your talk. I'm thinking about your example where you decreased the opportunity by 90%, and I'm thinking about a talk from earlier where we heard about having empathy with the stakeholder you're sharing this really hard information with. And I want to know what role you played, if any, or what other stakeholders played this role of thinking about, okay, then what is the opportunity here? If I'm telling you that there's not this opportunity, how can I then also be your ally in talking about, okay, well then what are we going to do instead?
Yeah. I think the one disclaimer for this type of research is that ultimately, like, I'm not or you're not going to make the decision of what your team decides to invest in. So you paint that bull or bear case. In that case, it was a bear case. What I did after the kind of core section of the report is I put, okay, if we were to do this, how would we have to win? And painted kind of a strategic perspective of who we need to go to first, what actually matters, and what are the 3 to 5 capabilities we need to build if we're actually going to do this. So again, it's like, hey, eyes wide open. It's kind of the framing we use a lot. Eyes wide open. This isn't what we thought it was. If we're going to do this, let's make sure we set clear business goals that are in line with some of the reality that we're seeing. And then here's an approach we can follow. So you're not just leaving them high and dry with like, boom, bad idea. It's like, okay, ultimately you choose, and we will continue down this path if you think it's best and it makes sense for any conversations or contexts like I may not have or other people may not have or only the board has, for instance. But those are my kind of ways of getting around that.
Yeah, I often think of it as a yes and approach instead of a no approach.
Exactly.
I think we have time for one more quick one. Just shout it out and I'll repeat it.
How do you keep growth responsible in that you don't just focus on like high net worth or power users or all these other like very large and substantial clients or things like that? How do we also balance that with maintaining rigor for maybe smaller niche populations that maybe they're not going to be the ones that make us the most money, but we still need to be responsible and build for them as well? How do you balance that?
To repeat that for people online, how do we think about responsible growth and taking care of our minority users in however we define that?
Yeah. I try to think about it in terms of like size of the bet, right? We can make really, really big bets. We can make medium-sized bets. We can make small bets. And we always want to have an eye on like, okay, what do we think those bets will get us? So maybe a small bet is making an example from Figma, making an investment in like illustration tools. We know we're probably not gonna, go crazy, but we know designers love that, and we know that hey, we can do more. So let's invest in that. That's an interesting growth opportunity. Maybe it's not like crazy big, but it's super valuable. And again, like you start to think about not just price and quality, right? So like design power, ease of use, like that can actually be a really interesting framing of why we would go for a product offering or something like that.
Yeah, I love it. I also think something to think about, especially if you're using quantitative metrics, measure those things and make sure you're really reporting out on it. Like I have a talk from 5 years ago on why you should be considering religion in user research. I still stand by that, especially now. But like make sure you're measuring those things and thinking about them. And if something starts to arise, that's probably a good time to be a squeaky wheel. Gus, spectacular as always. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zoe.
And for our last but certainly not least talk of the day, David is going to talk to us about logging. I'm so excited about this one. I did blind message him at Google and was like, hey, I watched this talk. Could you come talk to us? And he went with it, which was great. So thank you so much, David, and logging.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. This is so exciting to be here. What a great panel of folks that I get to be a part of. I'm easily the most junior member. If you're paying attention to the program and this slide, you'll notice that my job title is slightly different. I did get a promotion between when I agreed to do this and now. Yes, thank you, and I mostly brought that up to also explain the updated picture. But a big part of the case that was made about why I deserved the promotion actually had to do with my engagement with logs. So that's what I'm really talking about today. Now, spoiler alert. The one message that I want to get across today is that logs are a valuable tool for every UX researcher. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, David, I am a qualitative researcher. What I know about logs is that they are very quantitative, and I either have neither the skill or maybe not the interest in engaging with logs. I get that. I am also a trained qualitative researcher. My background is in ethnography. And I still feel like logs are an incredibly valuable tool for all of us to have in our toolkit. If you lack the skill, there are going to be other people in your organization who are more quantitatively oriented, right? They might be engineers, they might be data scientists, they might be quantitative researchers. But partnering with them when you need to, I think, is going to be incredibly helpful. Also, for context, when I'm thinking about growth, I'm really thinking about growing the number of the users of the product, growing the number of paid users, product development so that we add more value to what we're bringing our current users, increasing product engagement, and ideally getting folks to the point where they are ready to potentially upgrade because you've got additional features that they really want or need, are going to solve a problem that they have, help them do a job. So first, what are logs? Well, they're sort of a digital record, a little bit of a footprint of the activities and events that take place within a software product or a system. You think of it as like a census of a lot of the activities, the actions, and the events that folks are doing. When you have any kind of a digital product or service, you're going to want or need to record what folks are doing in that product or service. Now, there's some great reasons to be doing this that have nothing to do with UX research, right? Software engineers use logs to help debug software and address problems. But there's a way that we as researchers can also leverage those logs. Now, also, what do logs look like in their kind of natural state? Yes, this is the fabulous life of working with logs. I know I should have led with this. This should have been my very first slide to draw you all in as to why you want to look at. I mean, who wouldn't want to spend day after day looking at this? I mean, absolutely fascinating stuff. Why talk to people, right? All right, so obviously this, for many of us, looks pretty brutal to look at. So then why are logs important? They certainly don't look that way. Beyond just like using logs to help kind of debug, which engineers do, the data is critical for kind of gathering any sort of stats that we might want. It's going to be important for capturing any user actions or interactions that they take in the products that we're making. And they are critical to help making data-driven production decisions. Critically, logs are the basis for any type of metrics that we're going to be using, right? They're that raw material for metrics. And any goal that we have with a product, we need some way of measuring how we are progressing towards that goal, whether or not we are moving in the right direction, right? So when we're thinking about growth and monetization goals, like have we increased signups? Are there points in the sign-up process where people seem to be just dropping off? If they are, that's a signal to us that we need to dive in and figure out what's going on there in that moment. Are we seeing an increase in conversion from free to paid users? Are we seeing an increase in product engagement or a decrease in cancellations or an increase in cancellations, right? All of these metrics tell us what's going on with the tools that we have. If we want to realize those goals, we need to make sure that we are tracking what folks are doing. Logs are really good at answering a couple of types of questions. Really good at helping us know what folks are actually doing in a product beyond self-report. Self-report is also great. It's important that we use that as well, but let's face it, our memories are terrible. Our recollection is terrible. I couldn't tell you what I had for breakfast today, let alone what I did in a product today. They're also really good at helping us see how users' behavior changes over time. Are they increasing or decreasing use? Are they trying to use a different feature or a different product? So then how do we leverage logs, and how do we leverage these metrics as UX researchers? I'm going to do a couple of case studies. Now, let me just say, I'm not here talking in my capacity as a Googler. I'm not here to speak on behalf of Google. I will be drawing on examples from my own work. I have changed some of the details, because there are some things I'm just not allowed to talk about. But first, feature recommendation experiment. So we kind of identified that there was a particular feature. For today, we're going to pretend that it is the proposed times you're free feature in Gmail. This is not what we did the experiment with, but this is what this is what I'm going to call it. We realized that it was kind of an underused feature. Right? We weren't seeing a lot of engagement there. We weren't seeing a lot of use. So what we did, and we knew that already because we had logs. We were tracking that engagement metric. So what we did is we ran a little promo. We just popped up a little promo with a subset of our users saying, hey, here's this feature. Here's how it's useful. And then we tracked to see, like, what did engagement look like, right? We followed those logs. We used that metric to see the folks that saw that promo, what did their engagement look like immediately, and what did it look like over the next couple of weeks. And what we found was that there was an 800% initial increase in engagement with that feature, and almost a double sustained increase over time. Right? So something just as small as, like, what are we recommending, how are we recommending it, to whom are we recommending it, was pretty critical in just increasing adoption of that feature. And we can't know if we need to do that, and we can't know if we've successfully kind of promoted something if we're not tracking logs and the metrics that they're based on. Now, logs are, I think, incredibly powerful. They're incredibly useful. Logs are also imperfect. Logs and log metrics can't tell us everything. This next story is not from Google. It's told to me by a quantitative researcher that I work with who worked for a while at Spotify. But the team at Spotify was given this kind of mandate, right? Increase user engagement, specifically the number of songs that people are playing. They did this, they wanted to do this, particularly like listening to new artists and new songs. And they did this by developing and then later rolling out, if you use Spotify, you're familiar, rolling out the kind of For You feature, where they make recommendations of songs based on what you've listened to. They rolled it out, they watched the logs, who's playing, and they saw that there was no statistically significant change in the number of new songs or artists that were being listened to based on what the For You was saying. Uh-oh. This is not what the engineers who spent hours putting that feature together wanted to hear. This is not what the researchers and designers who helped put that feature together wanted to hear. It's not what the PMs who were tasked with increasing engagement wanted to hear, and it's certainly not what senior leadership who had seen all of this money devoted to this feature wanted to hear. So what did they do? They started off with a qualitative study follow-up, talked to people who had used the feature. Ideally, you can do that using logs to identify who to recruit. And what they found when talking to those folks that had used the feature is that oftentimes when something was recommended, people weren't playing it right then and there. They were saving it to listen to later. Because when they'd gotten on Spotify, the thing they wanted to do was listen to a song or an artist that they were familiar with, that they had gone to Spotify to hear. But learning this meant that the team knew they needed different logs and different metrics. And so as a result, they updated the metrics to how many songs are saved based on the For You feature. And when they started tracking that, comparing like the group that was seeing the feature versus others, they saw a huge spike in engagement. So again, having those logs helps define a metric. We needed qualitative research to help refine that metric later on, but it's still critical for being able to understand those growth opportunities. This just all indicates there are a bunch of things that logs can't tell us, right? They can't tell us who our users are. They can't tell us why people are doing or not doing certain things. They can't tell us how those products fit into the other behaviors and activities and lives that our users have. And they really can't tell us what people think about our products or features. Logs are really great. They're incredible. They tell us important things. But there's a bunch of things they can't tell us. And I think this is where, as a qualitatively trained researcher, I get the most excitement and joy out of working with logs, is bringing logs into conversation with more traditional UX research methods. So I'm going to go through a couple of case studies here. I've done several projects now that have used more traditional UX methods with logs. I'm going to talk about a couple of case studies, one using surveys and one using kind of qualitative interviews. So the first one, pairing logs with survey data. And again, I've tweaked some details of this example just for the sake of being able to present today. The primary goal, so we had this goal of trying to understand what are the needs of customers who reduce the number of licenses they have, right? Ultimately, our goal is to make sure that we, especially if we're thinking about growth, we want to minimize how many folks are reducing or canceling their subscription entirely, right? So are there differences between folks that are reducing their licenses and those who are not? When I say seat here, that's just like shorthand for a license. I wanted to make sure it fit on one line. Secondary goal here, though, was to try and understand, are there ways that we can add value implicitly? We weren't doing qualitative interviews to know for sure, but implicitly, can we identify that in order to retain some of those folks? So my team, every couple of years, does this big cross-product growth survey, where we ask folks a whole bunch of questions about themselves, about their businesses, about the types of products that they use, the activities that they do, features that they might need or want to see. We also ask folks, optionally, if they would like and consent, for us to link their survey responses to their logs so that we can look at concretely what are they doing in the product. And so I was able to take this data, I was able to focus on folks that we knew had lost seats in the last year, compare them to folks that had either not lost any seats or had added seats, added licenses, and see like what are the different needs that we see. And one of the things that came out of this was actually folks that lost seats, they reduced their licenses, were twice as likely as to say they value a recommendation about proposing times that you are free. Again, that's not the exact feature, but that's what we're going to use for today. So what we did from this then is, this actually is what drove the later experiment that we did. Right? We knew that this is something that folks that are reducing their seat count want to see. They say it's valuable to them. They're much more likely to say it's valuable to them than folks that are adding seats. So it told us that maybe there's a gap there in terms of what we're telling folks we offer them in product. So we ended up running the experiment. We're still waiting long term to see, like, does this reduce, like the folks who saw that promo, are they more likely or less likely to drop seats later on? Maybe next year, if I'm invited back, I can give you an update on that. TBD. And then finally, I've been using logs a lot for qualitative, in-depth interviews, right? So, for example, I think one thing that my team is really interested in is how do we onboard new customers to our product? What's working in that experience when folks are in their first 14, 30, 60 days? Are we helping them discover the value that the product offers? But I will tell you right now, that is a really, really hard group to try to find. You can't just send out a broad screener and find folks that happen to be in like the 14-day period where they may be experiencing some onboarding. So what I've done is I've been working with a data scientist on my team so that we can identify folks that are in that period. We've actually done multiple rounds of this now, because 14 days for the onboarding period is pretty short, so we're regularly doing this. But we know that they're in that period. We're able to send out an email inviting them to participate so that we're capturing them live while they are experiencing our onboarding process. And we can ask them, what are they experiencing? What have they seen? Have they noticed emails or nudges that we've sent to help them find out about the features of a product? We can ask them what their needs are. What are we doing well? What could we be doing better? What additional information would they like to have? Couple things that we've learned, we're still like in the middle of doing this, but a couple things that we've learned. One, analysis paralysis. Sometimes we're throwing too much information at our new users and they're just overwhelmed and they can't actually make a decision about what to do. That's super helpful for us to hear, right? Second, don't interrupt. If someone's coming into the product and trying to do something, throwing a big splashy pop-up in the middle of their way is not welcome. In fact, some people, I think, may have gotten carpal tunnel when they went to quickly close that splash screen out, hypothetically. But this was, again, super useful for us to be able to think, okay, now we know what users are saying. None of this is, by the way, none of these results here are revolutionary, right? If you read any sort of work on onboarding, these are like best practices, or don't overwhelm users and don't interrupt what they're doing. But it's so helpful when you can go to leadership and say, we talk to people that we know are in the onboarding experience. Here's what they are saying, right? Here are the pain points that they have. It helps you write that more compelling story. It helps you write that more bullish story to convince leadership to make some changes, make some adjustments to that onboarding experience. I'm not going to pretend like leveraging logs as a UX researcher, especially those of us that are qualitative researchers, I'm not going to pretend like it's an easy thing to do. There are absolutely challenges. There are issues with kind of inconsistency in what is getting logged. There are issues with data missing. There are issues with things being logged incorrectly. Sometimes there are even issues about like a lack of clarity as to what a particular log means. So you remember this beautiful image that I had up. It's so good, it's the only image I'm using. You'll see this. Now, I could tell you what many of these things are. I couldn't tell you what this one is. Primary DSCF product line unknown. No idea. And the data scientists, the quant researchers that I work with who are regularly sitting in logs will tell you that a good chunk of their work is just trying to search out what some of this stuff means so they know whether or not it's a thing that's worthwhile for them. So again, it's not always easy. Some other problems that come up is location. A lot of times, it's hard to figure out where a particular log is being stored. Different information can be kept for different amounts of time, right? Just in terms of like laws in different areas. And so they get stored in different places. And so part of what it is trying to figure out where is something. Also, logs are huge. There's so much data. It can be incredibly overwhelming. So I want to recognize all of those things. Despite those challenges, there's also user privacy and trust. That's important to talk about. So anytime I want to use logs as a UX researcher, I'm working with our privacy working group, and I'm working with our legal team. And they're really helping me drill down to make sure that I'm only engaging with the logs that are important for the study. They're helping me make sure that I am handling logs in ways that protect people's identities, maintain their anonymity. When we do that survey to try and ask people if they'll consent to letting us link their survey responses to logs, I'm working with my privacy working group and legal to make sure that the language we're using, communicating what we're asking of them, is clear and easy to understand. We're making it clear what logs we're linking to, and we're making it clear how long the data will be kept, as well as how they are able to withdraw that consent at any point. Like, all of that is super, super helpful. Because if you're not careful, it would be all too easy for somebody to connect what somebody has said to the actual customer, or what someone's doing in the product to the actual customer. We want to be careful of that. Even when I'm using logs to recruit for a study, we basically have a black box system where I can throw in user IDs, but I never know what email address that links to. So when we recruit that way and get people in, I know that they were part of that sample of folks that are in the onboarding experience, but I don't know specifically who they are. And again, that's in part to protect people's privacy and maintain trust with our users. All of these challenges aside, I still think the payoff is worth it, right? The ability to be able to track what users are doing, to understand what they're doing in product, to understand where they may start but never finish something, the ability to recruit folks that maybe have had a particular behavioral experience, to be able to sit down and talk to them and walk through it so you can figure out like what's working, what's not, what was the problem they encountered, what were they trying to do, how did you fail to help them in the moment. All of that I think is super valuable, and again, helps us with those growth, helps us do both things. It helps us with both with those growth objectives that we have, but it also helps us be better to our users. It lets us identify those problems and try to find solutions for them. So that is why I think everybody that is in here, every UX researcher that's in here, should include logs as part of your toolkit, right? We need it in order to have those metrics, to track objectives. We want it so that we can be able to do those interesting recruitments, and to be able to kind of figure out, are there sentiment differences between different types of behavioral users? And that's all I have. Thank you so much.
I think we can all agree that he was clearly the most under-leveled researcher of all time, and probably still is. Thank you so much. So I do want to kick us off with my own question, selfishly, to start. So a lot of us, I think, are quant researchers or maybe don't even know how to start pulling in that query. Who would you recommend partnering with if I wanted to start to look at this data? Who could I reach out to on my team?
That's a really great question. So I'm very lucky, I won't pretend otherwise, I'm very lucky to have a quantitative researcher partner and a data scientist that I regularly go to begging to help me get this stuff.
Great.
And I send them all sorts of like thank yous. I tell their managers like how amazing they are to try to pay them off. Because very rarely am I able to go back to a data scientist and say, I did some interviews, it's so good for you. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I think certainly one of the things we can always lean into, one of the things my talk will be about is pushing for like counter metrics. So if somebody made a question over here earlier, what if it's a bad idea? You're like, oh, actually, well, let me measure why I think that might be a bad idea and bring that back up. So you can disagree and commit and hold people accountable. Questions from the audience. And who's got my mic? My mic is here. Guys, this talk was amazing. Let me see my hands.
I mean, to be fair, I am standing between everyone and happy hour.
That is fair, but
I'm aware of this.
Well, we got one over here. Great. And then we'll go to Constantine on the other side of the room after that.
Hi, David. Thank you so much for your talk. I really enjoyed it. You gave a really great example earlier about finding out that the metric you were using was the wrong metric. And I'm curious if you have any stories or experiences about having a false positive, where you got a kind of measurement, but it ended up being correlated to something else, or caused something else. Correlation's not causation. And if so, what kind of other things can you look to help mitigate that? Like maybe in a big company, there's some other initiative going on.
So when you say like a false positive, you mean like the log suggested something was going on, but then when you dig deeper, we find out that's not what's going on?
Yeah, or if for example, you recruited people and then thinking they exhibited a certain behavior and they didn't.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I think relatively recently, I'm going to have to keep this vague, but relatively recently, I was doing some work on a particular feature use, and logs seemed to indicate that there was only one group of folks that were engaged with this feature and using it a particular way. And everyone, I think, wanted to know, like, well, how can we get other people to do the same thing? So I started doing qualitative interviews with those folks that supposedly were using the feature in this particular way. And it turns out that they weren't. And honestly, so we still haven't presented those results to everybody, so I'm not sure how it's going to go over when I say, like, the use case you think you have isn't the use case that you have. This is what people are actually doing. So I don't have anything more than that. I mean, I think ultimately the way to address that stuff, it comes down to like really good storytelling, like Gus was saying, right? It's really about like saying like here's what I'm hearing from folks. Here's how this changes our understanding. And I think I've also found in general for myself taking a yes and approach, right, to Zoe's point,
Love
which
me,
is
yes, and.
not telling people no. Nobody likes to hear no, especially those that are higher and higher and higher above you. So saying yes and, like, yes, we do have some folks that are doing that, and we have folks that are using it in this other way. Or this group isn't actually the group that we thought it was. Here's what they really are. And how does that change maybe how we approach developing the product, reaching out to other users, et cetera?
I love it. And
Great
then
question.
we'll go over to Constantine on the other side of the room, or are you pointing to the person next to you? Perfect. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, love the talk. Question would be, when you're looking at the log data, I know you were talking a lot about metrics like engagement, et cetera. Do you ever consider look at some of the environmental factors that might be in the log data that could give you clues on like what's sort of mediating that behavior? So for example, time of day, or not necessarily location, but they take one action and 5 seconds later they're like clicking a button 10 times and looking for those types of signals.
Great question. Short answer is yes. Time of day is not one that I've looked at, although immediacy in terms of when someone clicks on something and then how they act on it is something we have looked at. Other kind of more contextual things, or things that I think of as contextual, is like what type of device is somebody using when they're doing a thing? Is it a mobile device? Is it a laptop? Is it a desktop, right? Because I think that also tells us something about like what's the context in which somebody is engaging particular activity. Great question.
I love it. We got 1 minute, but I'm going to push it. Yes, right here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Great talk. Really interested in the qual and quant relationship. And I wanted to pick up on something you mentioned in response to the other question. So how do you handle it when you have qual and quant data that disagree? So your quant logs suggested users were behaving in a particular way. Your interviews said not so much. You personally, how do you handle that? Thanks.
It's a really great question. Again, I am very privileged in that I get to work so closely with a quant UX researcher and a data scientist so that we can kind of hash out some of those disagreements before they get up to more senior leadership. That doesn't mean it hasn't happened. We've definitely had times where what UX and data science are saying is different than what marketing is saying. And we had something happen about a year ago where 2 different reports landed in front of senior leadership that said very opposite things, and it got to be very hairy. I think one thing that absolutely helps, and this actually has nothing to do with like our actual ability, but the more we build bridges with our cross-functional partners, the easier it is when those things come up to kind of dive in and problem solve together and say, okay, where do we think the metric, what do we think the metric's actually getting? What do we think these users, or who these users are? How do we bridge that gap between the two? Yeah, it can get hairy. And it's one of the joys of the job, I guess.
I love this because I think it's no one's wrong. There's just slightly different North Stars or perspectives. And the earlier you grab that, you're probably going to get something more powerful when you get together. And if not, don't panic. I think that's the pieces that gets there and you're like, oh shit, I got to figure it out. You don't. You just got to figure out where your questions diverge. Just take a step back there and be like, okay, it's just this slightly different path. And that's the risk and benefit of being opinionated. Ultimately, it's still very, very worth it.
And if not being opinionated is hard for you, Xanax also works.
I highly recommend.
I say that as somebody who has a prescription, so.
Yeah, only fentanyl crisis. Don't take anything that's not you. So we are unfortunately out of time, but I do think David's sticking around, so he's here for questions. There are also multiple more days of this. People have been canceling a little bit, so keep an eye on your email if you want to attend other days and you haven't yet been able to get in. Spectacular to be here with you all today. Thank you so much for joining us. Go out, grow. We can't wait to see what you accomplish.
Thank you.